Good afternoon. My name is Allison McKenzie, and I am the chair of the Historic Conservation Board. I would like to take a minute to remind everyone about the rules of this proceeding. This proceeding is at all times governed by the rules of procedure adopted by the board on September 26, 2011, last amended on March 9th, 2020. A copy of the rules of procedure is available for review in the back of the room and online. All those planning to testify today, which does not include those solely making arguments such as attorneys, should please stand now and take an oath administered by the board's attorney.
So again, anyone on any item that's going to provide any testimony that's not an attorney, if you could please raise your right hand. You don't want to answer out loud. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you shall provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
Still here.
This is a quasi-judicial hearing. As such, the board reserves the right to deliberate in private. The Ohio rules of evidence do not apply to this hearing. However, professional rules of conduct do apply, and candor to the tribunal is required. The board members are citizen volunteers and are not paid for their service. They are treated as public officials under Ohio law. Any attempt to influence them, including but not limited to bribery, intimidation, retaliation, which may include contacting their employer in an attempt to exert influence, is punishable as a crime. All should be aware that this meeting is being recorded. Therefore, before you begin your comments, please state your name and address for the record. With that said, let's proceed with the first item. Mr. Owen, I believe we have a consent agenda item.
Correct.
Does anyone wish to move the consent item to be a discussion item?
That's the item one.
Item one.
Yeah.
If not, I will entertain a motion on the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Zalasko?
Aye.
Ms. Smith-Dobbins?
Aye.
Mr. Sunderman?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
The chair votes aye. Okay, we are ready for item number 2.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 2 is an application for a certificate of appropriateness for 3045 Wold Avenue in the East Walnut Hills Historic District. This is an existing residence along the west side of Wold Avenue. The applicant is proposing the addition of a 2-car garage on the north elevation of the building. There is no zoning relief involved in this application with the zoning the zoning code not requiring the base zoning setbacks to be met in historic districts. There is no zoning relief. So the application is just for the certificate of appropriateness. So you can see on the screen, this is the current site plan where 3045 Wold currently has no garage. It has an existing parking pad to the north side of the building. Historically, the building to the rear at 3043 Wold served as the carriage house for this building, but it was subdivided in the past to create a new single-family residence on the rear parcel, leaving this property without an existing garage. So the applicant is currently proposing a garage on that north elevation, which you can see on the proposed site plan. It will be pushed back from the front facade of the building, as well back from the street to limit its visibility and prominence on the site. It will be 20 feet in width and 34 feet in depth to allow for some additional storage area at the back of the garage. There is also a proposal for a covered porch addition on the rear of the building that will not be visible from any of the surrounding streets. Staff is supportive of the proposal based on the siding of the garage. You can see the existing photo of the front facade of the building where the car parked in the approximate location of that proposed driveway. So you can see that it will be pushed back from the front facade of the building, which again, on the floor plan, it is about 23 feet back from the front facade of the building, the primary facade, not including the extended bay and the front covered porch. And it is approximately 123 feet from the street frontage. So you can see the elevations with the original or the existing building compared to the building with the proposed addition. So staff finds that the addition does substantially conform to the guidelines in terms of materials and scale and massing. It is a single-story garage. It will be attached onto the existing north kitchen wing of the building, and that roof of that kitchen wing will be extended to meet the new roof of the proposed garage. The materials are complementary to the existing building. It will have similar terracotta roofing, and it will have a stucco finish on the front sides and rear elevation, which is in keeping with the accent material that's found on the historic materials of the existing house. So you can see from the side elevation, it gives you a good idea of how much further back that garage is located from the front facade of the building. And then also on the rear, I had mentioned the covered porch addition. So this is the existing condition, and this is the proposed with the garage addition on the left and the covered porch addition here. So the covered porch addition also, staff finds that it does substantially comply with the conservation guidelines. The materials are appropriate and compatible. And again, this will have no visibility from the primary street. So staff does feel, as I mentioned, that this is appropriate and in keeping with the conservation guidelines. It is pushed towards the rear of the property. It is on the north side, technically in the side yard, but at 123 feet from the street frontage and over 20 feet back from the facade of the house. Staff finds that it will not overshadow the architecture of the existing building. And it will take a respectful back seat to the main architecture, which is what the conservation guidelines call for. So staff does feel that this proposal substantially conforms to the guidelines, and staff would recommend the Historic Conservation Board take the following actions based on plans by Zobrist Design Group dated 1/24/25. Approve a certificate of appropriateness for 3045 Wold Ave.
Thank you, Mr. Owen. Brad and Amanda Burke, if you would like to come forward, and if you have anyone else on your applicant team that you'd like to bring with you.
Okay.
Is there anything,
I'll have to.
is there anything you would like to add or tell us about your project that staff does not?
We just feel it's necessary. I mean, it's right now we have bikes and all the things that you would normally have in a garage, you know, sitting out there, garage cans, things like that. So we feel like it'll really help improve that entire area and allow us to have some storage there. Obviously, we all know the house behind it that had the original garage, so we don't have an option now to move forward with that. So this is what we feel like is going to be the best thing to complete the house and give us what we need to have some storage and really alleviate some eyesores sitting out there. But
Can everyone just state their name for the record?
oh, sorry, Brad Burke, 3045 Old Avenue.
Amanda Burke, 3045 Old Avenue.
I'm Thomas Arnold, architect of the Zobrist Design Group. We're the applicant on the project, Representative Burks.
Did you want to add anything additional?
Sure. At the risk of being redundant, Mr. Owen did a good job with describing the design. Just wanted to reiterate that the need for the garage was not the result of something that the applicant did, the owner, but rather the predecessor in subdividing the lot chose to remove the existing garage/carriage house. So there's obviously a need for the garage. We feel like this is a good solution, not only working within the guidelines architecturally, appropriate proportion, detailing and finish, but also done in a manner that has already been approved on other projects, specifically properties to the west and the north, both have attached garages.
Actually, all three do. All three surrounding houses do.
Are there any questions for the applicant or staff from the board? We do have maybe one or two others signed up for this case. Mr. Tim Berkey, are you here as an attorney or?
I am here as an attorney, yes, ma'am.
Okay, please come forward if you have a case that you would like to present. Now would
And
be the time.
I will have a witness, but before calling the witness, I'd like to do some cross-examination.
You may do so.
And let me, for the record, and I know what the answer is, but just for the record, I would like to cross-examine staff.
Unfortunately, that is not permitted by the regulations, but it has been noted for the record.
I understand. I would like the opportunity to begin by cross-examining Mr. Arnold. Mr. Arnold, did you prepare the plans,
I prepared the plan.
the plans that are presented here?
Yes, I'm gonna be working as part of the team at the Zobrist Design Group.
And did you actually prepare two separate plans at one point?
Did we prepare separate plans? No.
Didn't you prepare a plan that proposed the garage being located at the northwest corner of the property?
We looked at different design considerations, including a swimming pool and a surround and retaining wall. And in that context, talked about the potential for a detached garage, and we ruled that out.
You actually, isn't it true, and perhaps you don't know, wasn't Ms. Valentine, who owns the property immediately next door, shown two separate locations for the garage?
I can't speak to that. Maybe the
We'll
Burks
come
can.
to, Ms. Burke was the one who presented those to Ms. Valentine.
I don't believe we've ever seen it, the drawing, and submitted that. We discussed that that was, you know,
An
I
option.
did not,
Well, we're not
I'm
lawyers, so
trying-
we're answering the question.
what I'd like to do is be able to cross-examine a witness and then the other witnesses. It doesn't help if three people try to speak at once.
Mr. Arnold, please answer the questions, and if others are needed, we'll get
To
to.
answer your question, Mr. Berg, we did look at different options. Did we present those to the neighbor? No, we did not.
You did not.
Did not.
Were there different drawings, one of which showed the garage at this location and one of which showed the garage at the location in the northwest corner of the lot?
We, as architects, we just explore options on the front end, and we did explore that, and there were sketches to that effect.
So it did include sketches for
Yes, yes.
the other location. I've marked one document that I would use as an exhibit, and if I may, avoid falling.
We got it.
Mr. Arnold, in developing the plan for the location of where you've got the garage now, did you consider what, if any, impact that would have on the Valentine property?
We would give consideration to any adjoining properties, sure.
And can you tell me what consideration you gave to the Valentine property?
I don't know if you can be more specific.
You just told me you gave consideration to it. I'm asking you what the consideration was that you gave to the Valentine property.
What, in expanding any home, what impact, if any, would that have on adjoining property owners? Sure, we would want to give them a facade that would be pleasing from their perspective, for example, and that would be the case here.
And are you,
Pardon me, Mr. Burke, is the property you're discussing at 1861 Dexter?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
yes. And I'm sorry I did not identify that. That was my intention. Do you know where the Valentine patio is?
Do?
Can you point it out on the plat in front of you?
Did we have this oriented the right way?
I think this is like.
Wait a minute.
House.
Yeah, we're rotating it.
I rotated it.
It was rotated
This
90.
isn't their exhibit. I think they can consult to figure out what weighs up.
Is there a problem with that? I mean, here's the Valentines. here's
And
the
where are you
Burkes,
pointing out the patio is?
and we're back in this area.
And the patio actually becomes the closest built portion of the Valentine property to the garage you are proposing to build, isn't it?
If you, technically their garage is closer to the Burke property that they built previously than is the terrace that you're referring to, but I understand your question. You're describing the proximity of the proposed garage to their terrace.
Correct. The staff report indicates that they've received 5 letters of support for the project from nearby property owners. That's not quite accurate, is it?
Again, you'd have to be more specific.
Did you prepare a letter that neighbors were asked to sign?
We did.
So it wasn't a letter that was prepared by neighbors, was it?
No, we prepared a letter and gave the neighbors the opportunity to review the documents and either choose to support it or not.
The letter doesn't say they support it, just says they don't object.
That's acceptable either way.
Pardon?
That's acceptable either way, right? No objection.
But
Or
that's
support.
all the letter has them saying is no objection, isn't it? I'll show you one of the letters.
That's correct.
If the garage were to be built in the rear, as many of the other garages in the immediate neighborhood are, it would be back in the area where there are already existing garages, wouldn't it?
It would be in the vicinity of other garages. And as amidst our conversations, we suggested that maybe that's one too many garages. But yes, it would be in the vicinity of other garages.
And you've indicated that the Valentine garage is an attached garage
It appears to be physically attached to their house, yes.
by simply a breezeway. By simply a breezeway.
It's a breezeway, but it's still attached to the house, correct?
Did you include, for the benefit of the board, any photos of the Valentine patio?
Not specifically. We took pictures of the Valentine home as we did a host of the surrounding neighboring properties. We took multiple shots of the Valentine home, both from Wold and Dexter.
Isn't it true that one of the things that makes the East Walnut Hills Historic District particularly attractive and unique is the large lots?
That you could say that's one contributing factor, sure.
And while City Council may have amended the ordinance to delete the requirement for setback variances, that doesn't eliminate the desire, the need to protect the historic features of the district, does it?
I think the guidelines would be consistent with that statement.
And how many other properties in the immediate vicinity have garages built within 5 feet of the neighbor's property?
I could not answer that specifically.
I have no other questions for Mr. Arnold. I would like to ask a couple of questions of Ms. Burke. Ms. Burke, you invited Ms. Valentine to your house to discuss your plans, is that correct?
Correct.
Pardon?
Correct.
And what did you show her?
I showed her this packet that I showed every neighbor that Zobrist Design shared with us. It's this packet. this is what and I actually printed it all out and put it in a folder and delivered it to her a couple weeks before so she could sit with it and if she had any questions.
Is it your testimony here today that you did not show her any drawing of the garage being built in the northwest corner of the property?
Yes, it is my testimony. That's correct. We did talk about it, just talk about it when we were in the driveway. But I have never, no, I don't even have that drawing.
Do you recall when Ms. Valentine was out there and you were standing in the driveway showing her where the garage would be built, that she said it was too close to her property?
She said, I do have a concern. And I said, then the pre-hearing is tomorrow if you'd like to come on, or we're happy to express your concerns as well.
And did you do anything to try and address her concerns?
Yes.
What?
We chatted for an hour and a half at my house. I followed up in text message, I believe Friday, as well as a couple other times. I printed out the material, asked her if she had any questions. I mean, yes.
Why did you reach out to her on Friday?
Because I understood that she had additional concerns and I wanted to ask if she had any additional questions that we could help alleviate her concerns.
How was it that you found out she had additional
I
concerns?
chatted with our neighbors, who are all supportive, by the way.
I have no other questions of these witnesses. I would like to call my witness. And I don't know how,
Sit up here. Just one witness.
just one witness, I can go
Yep.
wherever you want me to go.
She can sit here, if that's
You want her to go up there?
whichever,
Fine.
you can move or she can.
She just go right here. And I'll go up here if that's okay. Just in case you need this. Ms. Valentine, can you please identify yourself?
Yeah, Margaret Valentine, 1861 Dexter. The house also has a Wold address, and it would be 2 up from their address.
And how long have you lived there?
34 years, maybe.
And can you give the board some background of your involvement in historic preservation efforts?
Yeah, I was on the Cincinnati Preservation Board for a number of years. I managed the Fall Forum, which brought in speakers to give different views and topics relating to preservation and conservation, from landscape architecture to, just every other aspect that would affect the built environment. And the tying thread to everybody that I had come was the preservation of a sense of place. And East Walnut Hills' sense of place is open views. And that was part of what allowed for the historic designation, was the openness. And so I think this property would make that different. And when you were dealing with historic properties, you need to honor the past with a look to the future. And you need not destroy what people know about what the history was, and that the future can be informed. And when properties are changed or buildings lost, it destroys for people who live there the sense of place. And that's mainly what I am talking about. This structure would involve changing the view in the neighborhood. In the original historic documents, it said there weren't walls or fences or anything to occlude views up the driveways and around. And this certainly would occlude that view, especially me. I am the one that this affects the most. This is right off my terrace. It's right off my sunroom. And there is another option. And I did see the Zobrist drawings and they are excellent. They fit in, but the location is the problem on the front view. The garage put back where the other garages are would be preferable to maintaining what East Walnut Hills represents and also maintaining that historical sense of place. And I have, on the Cincinnati Preservation Board, was instrumental in shepherding good decisions that maintained the history and allowed the future to move forward with the knowledge and stopped inconsidered, just naive decisions with educating people on what preservation means and how to maintain that sense of place. And I keep using that sense of place that is so important in architecture and especially in historic districts. And one thing that makes this one a little difficult is that the historic district doesn't have the same rules for setbacks and things that every other, other districts do that aren't historic districts. And so that's what causes a difficulty here. So I saw the other garage, the drawings, and it is beautiful too. But I believe that one should be the one that's built because it's back next to my garage. And when I moved into the neighborhood, it was kind of tired. And our house, the modillions were falling off. The capitals on some of the columns had fallen off. The porches were not stable. We brought that property back. And this is one of the principles of historic preservation, espoused by John Stebbs of the World Monument Group. Once one property is brought back, it spurs on bringing back a whole street, a whole neighborhood, a whole area. And the same is true of putting something in that doesn't fit. Then that would encourage other things that don't fit. So we want to preserve what's there and honor the layout of the historic district. And I really was, I don't think that my expertise in the preservation area it gives me a better view of how to talk about this. Now, it does affect me personally because of where this is, but I would have the same opinion were this not my house next door. I think it's not the appropriate thing. And in fact, when another neighbor put a garage, which is further back from this particular one, the neighbors across complained because they said it would obstruct their view. Well, if that one that's way back would obstruct their view, how is this one not obstructing the view? It is. And that was one of the things that the same people who are talking now talked then. And, I have expressed my concern that it was too close to my property. No, I didn't get out a blowhorn or, write letters or anything. I just said it was too close to my property. And it would destroy why I had moved into the property. It was the openness, living in the city with all the property and with a bird sanctuary back there. I don't know what else I can say.
Peg, does the loss of view particularly impact your terrace and patio?
Oh, absolutely, because the garage is right there and it would occlude the view going out toward Wold and the rest of the neighborhood. I would not have the view over to Anwood. I would not have that space, that expanse is why people move into East Walnut Hills. They move in for the spaciousness of the view, for the sense of place.
Mr. Burke, I apologize. Mr. Owen, could you put the site plan, proposed site plan up there? Thank you. Sorry.
Mr. Burke, did you have additional questions?
I have no other questions of Ms. Valentine. I would, at the appropriate time, like to do a closing argument.
Sure. I do have a couple questions before we go to public comments. Ms. Valentine, are you okay with the general design of the garage? Is it just a location issue? Just trying to understand more.
Oh, I know, I praise the architect. It is gorgeous. It does fit the property. I object 100% to the location, 100% for how it affects me and how it affects East Walnut Hills in general.
Mr. Owen, I know that zoning setbacks are overridden for historic districts. Would this be compliant with the setbacks if the zoning requirements were not, or setbacks were not overridden in this district?
No, this would need a 5-foot setback. There's a 10-foot side yard setback requirement in the base zoning, and they have a 5-foot setback provided.
Are there any additional questions for?
Mr. Owen, would there be sufficient room in the back where there's suggesting that perhaps the garage could be placed?
You mean as far as setbacks or physically on the site?
Oh, I'm talking about getting it farther away from her house.
I mean, this was the plan that was presented to me, so I did not
I understand.
investigate that too much further, so.
Okay. Yeah.
May I comment? Putting that garage back there, to answer your question, it would be fine. It wouldn't occlude anybody's view. It's next to my garage. And I'm fine with that.
If you would like to please add why perhaps you have pursued the location that.
Sure, there are so many reasons, and we've worked closely, obviously, with Zobrist and thought through all of this and landed here for a reason. One of the big reasons, and there's so many, but one of the big reasons is this is an existing parking pad, so we are trying to maintain the little bit of green space we have in the backyard for the kids, for a potential swimming pool one day. Dog. We're not trying to take more green space away when there's, an existing blacktop right here. Another reason is, the window that was filled in, that is not beautiful. And that's what's facing the Valentine's house. And you can see it in some of these pictures. We were so thrilled that this would be covering that. And this would actually look so much better than what is existing, an old wooden porch and that bricked in window. So we thought that it would look a lot more appealing. Pushing it back, actually, that building would be technically closer to her property by doing so. It would also put another box in the middle of, the properties.
I would argue it would obstruct the view of the bird sanctuary. Where this will actually go is actually in front of where the patio is, the door lined up with the sunroom there. So moving the garage back is actually way more in line with the patio and the walk through the breezeway, whatever you want to call it, the garage. And that would actually obstruct the view of the actual bird sanctuary, which is back here. This, where the elevation is, the patio is actually still above the roof of this because the elevation, I don't know that technically, but the drop is pretty considerable. So in our mind, it was like actually tucking it in behind this massive oak tree so you couldn't see it more. We actually thought of your view specifically. And we're like, well, this is the best spot to not obstruct the view because it's down the hill. It's out of the way. Up there, it's elevated another 6-8 foot, I guess it would be back there. And then we got to pour more blacktop and concrete to get all the way back to there.
I am struggling to understand where this view that we're including occurs.
Yeah, I don't.
And the Anwood comment, I don't understand that.
The what?
Anwood?
Because you're
Your view for Anwood has nothing to do with
Oh, I
Anwood that
can
way.
see from my house through, because of the openness of the driveways and there aren't buildings there, I can see the houses on Anwood. I can. I don't know that. you
Sure,
would
but our
understand
driveway
that.
has nothing to do with Anwood's that way.
I am saying from my solarium, I can look out my window across Wold, and I can see through to Anwood and Dexter Place and.
I'm 100% confident you'll still be able to do that without any issue.
Are there any additional questions from the board for the applicant or for staff?
I have a question for Mr. Owen. Where was the original placement of the carriage house in this drawing here?
It's back here,
Okay,
3043 Wold was the original carriage house.
thank you.
And that's the new garage.
That was approved.
Is that the carriage house you were asking about?
Just trying to figure out where the prior carriage house was.
You were asking about their prior carriage house?
It said that there was a carriage house on the property, but it looks like a split in half, so it's now the property behind.
Got it.
Okay, I believe that the only other person signed up may also be part of the architect team, Kurt Zobrist. Did you want to add anything?
No, I think most everything's been discussed.
Was anyone else here for this case? Now it's time for rebuttal. Yep, so if you have anything that you would like to rebut, you may do so.
So if any of the testimony you heard from Ms. Valentine, you'd like to respond to directly, I know you have already a little bit,
Thank
but
you.
anything else you'd like to say in response to that testimony you've heard, you can do that now. And then you'll also have an opportunity to have the final word and make closing statements after Mr. Burke has made his closing statements.
Sorry, I'm not a lawyer either, so
We're good.
is there any?
Well, I mean, I just want to say that we love this home and we very much respect the architecture and the historic nature of it and the neighborhood. And we want to preserve and maintain that. And we feel strongly with Zobrist that we're doing so here. Keeping all the tile roof, all the original elements, it's very much set back. We have so many trees. We think it's done in a very respectful way. Beautiful, yes. And, you know, I don't even think I think the idea of us wanting to maintain our backyard for all the reasons I said make a lot of sense than to add more driveway. And that's why we landed here. And is there anything else? Oh, and lastly, all three of our abutting neighbors have attached garages. We don't have a garage because, you know, the garage was separated when we purchased the home. And obviously we knew that, but we were always told by the previous owner that she had previously planned to do that it would fit, that we can add a garage. And so, you know, we got around to it. We've been there over almost 4 years now. And so, I guess that's all I would say.
Mr. Burke?
Closing. Let me begin with the issue of the fact that setback variances are no longer required. And I accept that fact. I do think, however, that particularly in an area like the East Walnut Hills Historic District, where one of the clear reasons why it exists as a historic district is its large lots and the separation that exists between properties there. That remains something to be considered. And when an applicant comes in and no longer has to comply with setback variances, that doesn't mean the adjacency to a neighbor's property line should not be considered. And that's what Ms. Valentine has talked about. In the issue of views from her outdoor living space, her patio, which unfortunately, in the closest picture was taken in the middle of winter. And I don't blame that on anybody. It's simply the fact that there was no good picture taken by the applicant to show where they were taking into consideration the views from the Valentine patio. And she's just testified very directly about how her views will be impacted because of the choice to put the garage where they are proposing to put it. When the garage could be put in the back where it would be clustered with other existing garages and have little impact on her views or on any views from the neighborhood. And I suspect you will recall, because I think you were all here when we had the case before you on Beechcrest. And one of the major issues there was the impact that adding a garage attached, a bigger garage attached to the existing home, and I know there were other issues involved, but one of the things you heard very strongly from the neighbors was a question about their views down Beechcrest to other properties because of the large lot in my client's home. And at that point, you gave them the opportunity not to have a decision made, but it was pretty clear what direction it was going in. And part of the reason it was going in that direction was views. And I will tell you that since then, by the way, the Tolberts sold their home and moved across the street and are now neighbors with the Schatz, who put the swimming pool in. And John Cranley will now be living on Beechcrest. But my point is that view issues in the East Walnut Hills Historic District are not something to be overlooked. They're something to be considered. And Peg has been a fighter for historic preservation for years. And now she's trying to protect the historic preservation of her own property. So I appreciate you giving her the opportunity to speak today. Thank you very much.
Would you like to make any additional closes?
I would just say, we are as committed as they are to the preservation. Thank goodness we got this house because there was a lot of things falling down that we've already fixed. We've already repaired the roof millions of times. We've put a ton of work into this. We've dutifully kept the historic nature of this. We have done many houses in East Walnut Hills, so this is not something that we haven't done before. We very much understand historic nature, how to repair things, keep things. That is our main goal. We meet here for a reason, for those type of homes. But there's many lots and homes in East Walnut Hills that are touching, or you can reach out the window and touch the other house. So to say that all the expansive lots, that's part of it, but that's not the overall characteristic of East Walnut Hills. Many of the houses are very close together in touch. When you talk about putting something in the yard that maybe could change the way things or affect things, I guess a 300-foot tower could also do that. A metal tower could change the way and what people put in the garage. And their views. I would argue that the only view this is gonna change is blacktop, bikes, and garbage cans. There's no view changing. In fact, you get a pretty red roof now instead of looking at all the other junk. I think we're doing this for a good reason, not for a bad reason. And, we hope you consider this in a favorable thing.
Are there any additional comments or discussion?
Well, I was just one little tiny comment to add. This is just, if it were set back that little bit that they're proposing, it would be 3 feet from her fence line, not 5 feet. So just, that's another.
Well, I guess the other thing is we could make it a single family car garage and be 10 foot and then so same arguments would be there, but that's not.
We're doing everything very nice and together.
Any additional questions or comments from the board? If not, I will entertain a motion.
Madam Chair, I'd like to move that we approve the COA for 3045 Wold Avenue with including staff.
Is there a second? Mr. Zalasko?
Aye.
Ms. Smith Dobbins?
Aye.
Mr. Freeman?
I'll say aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
The chair also votes aye. I'm not insensitive to the concerns, but I believe that this is a well-designed project that is within a few feet of what they even would be able to do on a, with the zoning code if it were not waived. So good luck with your project. I hope it does not impact you as significantly as you fear that it does. Item number 3. be great. Mr. Owen, if I could ask a quick question just before we start. Are there any attorneys representing parties in item number 3?
Yes.
Okay. Please state your name and who you are representing, both, whichever first.
Pete Kreider, Keating Muting and Clay Camp representing the applicant. Robert Klingler representing parties of interest, OTR Foundation, OTR Adopt, Kevin Pape, Frank Russell, Danny Klingler, and Suzanne Furman.
Thank you. That will just help me organize things as we move forward. Mr. Owen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 3 is an application for certificate of appropriateness and zoning relief for the property at 1426 to 1450 Walnut Street in the Over the Rhine Historic District. This is an application for a variety of things, including rehab of existing structures, partial demolition of an existing structure, and infill development, as well as site improvements. As part of the project, there is zoning relief that is required in the form of a locational variance to allow the building to be to provide a setback on Liberty Street where the building is required to be built to the corner, a locational variance to provide parking in what is technically the side yard of the property, and a special exception of 1 foot for an interior parking buffer area of 2 feet at the south property line, short of the 3 feet required. And then finally, a special exception of 12 feet for parking lot islands, providing 3 to 5 feet of separation short of the required 5 feet. So the existing property consists of several parcels on the southeast corner of Walnut and Liberty Street. Currently, it is made up of a surface parking lot on the corner fronting Liberty and a portion of Walnut Street, the existing Grammars building at 1440 Walnut, 2 partial historic structures where the rear additions were previously demolished due to public safety concerns, and then a fourth historic structure, which also has had the rear portion of the building demolished in the past. And the remainder of the area is made up of vacant land parking as well as vacant lawn grassy areas. So the application is requesting approval for the demolition of a portion of the Grammars building. So you can see on this proposed site plan, the existing historic structures are shaded in red. The Grammars building is at 1440 on the north end of the site. The dotted lines to the rear of Grammars are the portions that are proposed for demolition. So this does include the original rear portion of the building that was built at the same time as the front of the building, as well as later additions that infilled the courtyard, entry vestibule for the restaurant on the north, as well as a concrete block or a CMU garage to the south. So these at the rear of the Grammars building are all proposed for demolition. The front portion of the Grammars building is proposed to be retained. That includes the ornate storefront and entablature and pedimented cornice at the top. That also includes the interior spaces with the leaded glass vestibule, the storefront leaded glass windows, as well as the bar. Those are all located in the front portion of the building that is proposed to be retained. And you can see on this some more detail on the rear portion of the building that is proposed to be demolished. This is the view from directly behind the building on what was a former historic alley. This is the only substantial ornamentation on the rear portion of the building, consisting of that corbelled brick cornice along the top facing that former alley. You can see the details of the other structures. This is the circa 1960s entry vestibule in the parking lot. These are the 1 and 2 story additions in the interior courtyard. And this is the main block of the former restaurant, part of that original construction. So these are the structures that are proposed. The applicants also provided some interior photos of those demo portions showing that it is fairly utilitarian in nature without a lot of ornamentation on the inside as well. So as far as the demolition is concerned, the applicants are arguing under both demolition as a non-significant portion of the structure as well as an economic viability argument. So as far as the non-significant portion, the applicants are arguing that due to the lack of ornamentation or significant detailing on that rear portion, as well as the fact that historically this site was very tightly bounded by other existing historic buildings. In the 1891 Sanborn, 3 of the 4 structures were built at that point. Grammer's was built a little bit later in 1911, so that structure was not in place at this time. By 1922, you can see Grammer's in place as well as the other 3 buildings, and the majority of the rest of that block is heavily built out with dense development. You can see that former alley reaching back to the edge of Grammer's on the north part of the map here. So by 1950, you can see some of that demolition had already started to take place, but it was still a fairly intact block. And then moving to currently, after the widening of Liberty Street, there were a lot of demolitions on this portion of the block that has eroded the historic integrity of this portion of the district. So essentially, staff is supportive of the argument that this would be a demolition of a non-substantial portion of the building. As I had mentioned before, the dense development surrounding that building historically prevented any significant or substantial views into the interior of this block, aside from access from that narrow alley down the rear. There would be not many opportunities to view the rear section of that building. So historically, it was not a highly prominent part of the building. And as well, the building has lost some integrity through the alterations to that rear facade. There are likely ways that some of that integrity could be restored with the demolition of the additions alone. But the loss of the integrity of setting is really something that does hurt this building with all of the wholesale demolition surrounding it. So staff feels that with the non-significant portion of a building arguments that has been presented by the applicants, that staff generally agrees that this would be considered a non-significant portion of the building. By losing that rear section of the building, it will help to reactivate this portion of the block, essentially making it much easier to connect the 4 buildings that are proposed to be integrated into the new development with that new infill development. And the loss of that rear section will not affect the streetscape due to that new infill development essentially being built surrounding this portion of that rear. There will not be any substantial views to that rear section of Grammer's once that is built. Clay Street does come up in the vicinity of this, but that is currently a lightly used street. It functions more as an alley as it does dead end before you get to the Grammer's site. So staff feels comfortable with the argument that this is a non-substantial portion of the building that will not adversely affect the streetscape or the overall integrity of the historic district. You can see on the proposed site plan, the existing buildings that are proposed to be renovated as part of this project and incorporated into the new construction. And you can see on the edge at the northern part of the property, the building is designed to be perpendicular with Walnut Street, similar to the rest of the buildings in this area. There will be a fairly substantial setback off of Liberty Street at about 51 feet. However, that will include a residential outdoor area with a low knee wall and black metal fence surrounding this area. And that setback does gradually decrease as the building continues to the east to get to 0 at the rear corner. A little more detail on the site plan, you can see the integration of the historic buildings. There is a central corridor between the original buildings and the new construction. That does necessitate some steps to get into the historic portions of the buildings because they will not have the same floor heights as each other or the rest of the development. And then on the rear section of the site, there is the parking lot proposed for 71 vehicles. This will be 116 residential units. So it will not cover all of the residential units, but it will provide a significant amount of parking for the development. The zoning relief that's needed for this parking lot is related to its location within the L of this building. Technically, this area is considered to be in the side yard of the property because the rear line starts with the southernmost point of that building. So only this section down at the southern end would be in the rear yard, technically. However, staff considers this to substantially meet the intent of the zoning code as it will be behind the buildings when viewed from the street, and it will not have substantial visibility from the primary streets that are surrounding it. The other parking lot relief is related to this small section at the southern end, which has a 2-foot landscape buffer rather than the 3 feet required. And then the landscape islands, which are required to break up the parking lot, have between 3 and 5 feet of width rather than the 15 feet that is required by the zoning code. So in staff's opinion, staff finds that meets the intent of the zoning code by providing those landscaping areas with trees that are interior to the parking lot to provide additional shade and provide that break in the otherwise continuous pavement areas. Other design considerations, and you can see from the rendering here, the corner building on Liberty Street will be 5 stories in height. The infill section in the center and between the other historic buildings that are remaining will be 4 stories in height. You can see that setback on the corner of Liberty at this corner with the residential amenity area that will help to activate that streetscape more than the surface parking lot that's there now. So as far as the height is concerned, the interior infill portion of the building is 4 stories in height, which is consistent with the guidelines requiring within 1 story of adjacent buildings. But the buildings on either side are 3 stories in height. And then the Liberty block is 5 stories in height. So while that is 2 stories above the Grammer's building that is abutting the structure, when viewed from the Liberty side of the block, staff finds that it is more compatible when viewed in this context. So Liberty Street is a much wider arterial street, and staff has consistently taken the view that the larger arterial streets over the Rhine, such as Liberty and Central Parkway, we have generally been okay with some additional height on these streets just to the nature of the larger thoroughfares and the amount of traffic on these streets and that type of thing. So, but also when you look at the Liberty frontage, there's little context left along Liberty Street as this is mostly vacant land up against the right of way. However, if you look just to the other edge, there is a 4-story building that fronts the adjacent street in that same block. And then looking across Liberty to the north, there are also 2 4-story buildings. Expanding that context to the opposite block face, you also have multiple 4-story buildings further down on this block as well as 5-story buildings in that vicinity. So generally, staff does think that the 5-story height along that Liberty frontage is appropriate. It is somewhat taller than the guidelines recommend when viewed on Walnut. However, staff finds that 5-story height substantially is appropriate for the district, and staff finds that it does generally comply with the guidelines. As far as the massing is concerned, staff has no concerns with the massing along the Walnut Street frontage. There is along Liberty Street, it is obviously a much wider building because it does front on Walnut. So while the guidelines do not require the sides of a building to have more verticality than horizontality, the applicants have tried to use design choices to break this massing up somewhat and provide more vertical emphasis. Primarily done through the groupings of window openings, which are taller than they are wide, the use of pilasters to pull that verticality up, and then also through the use of the inset balconies. So the guidelines do state that balconies should not be permitted on street fronting elevations. So this does technically not conform to the guidelines. However, in staff's opinion, it is a useful feature of the building as it does provide some breaks. So to that long horizontal massing to help break the building up into different sections and provide that additional vertical emphasis. So in general, staff does feel that that massing of this Liberty block also is compliant. On the interior side facing the parking lot and the interior streets, that will be more of a fiber cement paneling cladding on the buildings. And as this is not going to be a highly visible feature of the building from the primary street, staff finds that that is an appropriate treatment for the secondary elevations. Yeah, so essentially just to reiterate, staff does find that this building substantially does comply with the conservation guidelines in the forms of design. The taller portion of the building that will connect the entire development will be pushed back from the street, so that will not be visible when viewed from the street. And then as far as the demolition goes for the rear portion of Grammars, staff would just reiterate that, it's not the ideal solution to lose any portion of any historic buildings in the historic district. However, staff feels that this is an acceptable compromise in this scenario. This building or this lot, this portion of the block has been essentially entirely vacant for decades. Grammars has been out of business for nearly 20 years. The other historic buildings that remain are in very poor state of repair. They are deteriorating continually, and the rehabilitation of the 3 other historic partial structures, as well as the front portion of Grammars on this site, staff feels that that is a willing compromise for the loss of that rear section of the building, which does not have a lot of ornamentation and will not be visible once the new construction happens, nor was it historically visible. So I would mention that this is a very similar scenario to the 15th and Vine development that was approved by the HCB back, I believe, in 2015, where in that case, there was a large fire that had destroyed 2 other historic buildings, nearly destroyed them. There was also an additional historic building that was intact on that site. And in order to renovate that portion of the block, the board did approve the demolition of the rear portion of that one historic building that remained intact in order to save the facades of the buildings that had been damaged by fire. So staff feels that this is a very similar situation to that case, and would recommend that the Historic Conservation Board take the following actions based on plans by City Studios Architecture dated 1/29/25. Approve the locational variance to provide the setback on Liberty Street where the building is required to be built to the corner. And I didn't give a lot of background in this. I should just mention quickly, as far as the setback, I did mention that there will be the residential outdoor amenity area along that edge that will help to activate the street. But really the streetscape along Liberty has then is not your typical streetscape that you'd find in Over the Rhine. That is primarily due to the road widening that happened back in the 60s. So essentially all the southern lots that fronted Liberty, the buildings on those portions of the street were demolished for the road widening. So currently Liberty Street does have that sort of jagged effect all the way down the length of the street that all the buildings front the north-south streets. So there is not a lot of zero setback development along the street. So so to continue, staff does recommend approval of that locational variance for the setback. Staff also recommends a locational variance to provide the parking in the side yard. Staff recommends approval of the special exception of 1 foot for the interior buffer yard area of 2 feet. Staff recommends approval of the special exception of 12 feet for the parking lot islands. And staff approves the certificate of appropriateness. Staff recommends approval, COA for 1426 to 1450 Walnut Street, with the following conditions: that the specific window series for the rehabilitation of the historic building shall be submitted to the urban conservator for approval prior to the issuance of building permits, as the windows are not appropriate on highly visible elevations of existing buildings, and that the building permits must be issued within 2 years of the decision date or the COA shall expire.
Thank you, Mr. Owen. Would Mr. Kreider like to please come forward and state your case?
Kenneth P. Kreider at Key Mutual and Camp representing the applicant, Farmers Place LLC. I'm going to defer to the architect and the client because they have a lot more to say about the facts and the design ideas, but I would reserve the right to A, cross-examine any witnesses that are adverse, and B, provide a summation at the end. Thank you.
Please make sure to identify yourself before you speak.
Good afternoon. I'm Deanna Heil with City Studios Architecture at 1148 Main Street. Thank you. Oh, go right ahead.
Should we identify all of ourselves?
Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm Mel Gravely. I'm with Traversity Construction, 921 Curtis Street.
I'm Kate Green, representing Urban Sites, 1209 Sycamore Street.
Thank you, Doug, for your thorough description. I don't have a lot to add. I feel like he has walked you through the project, which is consistent with our package, and we agree with his staff report and his comments. I would like to say a couple of things. Our design and ownership team worked really hard together to design this building on this unique site. It is unique because of the two different natures of East Liberty Street and Walnut Street. We've spent a lot of time with my tattered Over the Rhine historic guidelines, which are new to a lot of people, and have worked diligently to follow the guidelines. We were very thoughtful about our demolition request. We were thoughtful about our variance requests. And this project was very important to our team. It was important to start by laying out the building in a way that would best incorporate and highlight the historic structures. That was number one priority. It was also important to our team to design a building that was contextual and compatible. And we did not want to replicate the historic buildings. And it was very important to design a building that does not overwhelm and detract from the historic buildings that are incorporated into our project and also the neighborhood. I know that a few folks will be speaking today, so I would be happy to answer any questions along the way. And then, as Mr. Kreider stated, we'd like to make sure that we reserve time at the end to respond.
I just wanted to back out a bit and provide some larger context to the project. And so I think, as many of you are familiar, Urban Sites has been doing development work in Over the Rhine since the 1990s. And this site specifically is something that we've been dreaming about for over 20 years. And over the past few years, we've made a really strategic effort to comprehensively redevelop several properties within a 2-block radius of the site. So we currently have 12 projects underway, valuing another $12 million and wrapping around the corner of 14th and Walnut, and then heading further north towards Liberty. And so we have quite a bit of investment in the area. We're really excited about the work that we've done to date that have led this project to be possible. And then as Doug mentioned, and as you saw in the photos, the current site obviously has quite a bit of vacancy. Sidewalks are in disrepair. There's very minimal economic activity between Main Street and Vine Street. And we're really excited about being able to restore a lot of that activity. And so this is a project that is in partnership with Triversity. Urban Sites and Triversity are co-development partners. Triversity is also handling the construction, and Urban Sites will be handling the property management. So I'm going to kick it over to my partner, Mel, to share some of the details of the development and some of the benefits that we foresee.
I don't want to overwhelm you. I want to first admit I'm nervous as hell. Never been in a setting like this. It feels very formal. I'm glad someone went before us. So if I appear to be nervous, it's because I'm pretty nervous. But I want to just echo what Kate said. The project is about a $33 million project. It's about 116 units. We expect to start construction in August, and it is a transformational opportunity for our community in a number of ways. It improves that connectivity between Main and Vine, which I think is going to be a lifeblood for small businesses there. But it also connects us to the bridge to the north of Liberty, and starting to really impact the livability and quality of life north of Liberty as well. It's consistent with our region's need for housing. It has significant density that we're bringing to that property, and most of all, it preserves a community gem for the future. And it's odd that we're sitting in a room discussing the historical value of this when we all recognize the historic value of the building we're set to reinvigorate. And that part of this makes it all that more important. It's funny that they reference 15th and Vine, that property there. Our company built that facility as well. And so our mind toward this, our ability to execute this with the right dignity around this property is strong. And there are a number of variances we're asking for here, but there are also a number of historical items we are going very hard at preserving. And I hope that's highlighted in our conversation today as well. There's probably 7 other things I was supposed to say, but as I said, I was nervous, and I'll pass it over to our architect.
Anything additional on?
Not right now.
This case? Okay, Mr. Klingler, if you would like to come forward, examine if you'd like, and then present your case.
No questions on cross-examination, thank you. And I really don't have a presentation myself. I'm here primarily to introduce the parties of record whom I'm representing and ensure that they have sufficient time to say what they have to say. And I believe those people are Danny Klingler, Suzanne Furman, and Frank Russell. I think all 3 of them would like to say something.
Would you like to deal with seating?
So if we could have, since there's no cross-examination, if we could have the applicants give up. Mr. Klingler, your clients can then take the table here.
Sorry, did you say this one or this one?
This one. Then another chair you can pull over.
Please introduce yourself and let us know what you would like to.
My name's Danny Klingler, Madam Chair, as a member of the board. Good to see you. I'm also nervous as hell. I'm trying to staple documents. I hope you didn't hear the clicking. But I'm here today speaking on behalf of a group of the stakeholders that were just mentioned. Myself as a resident and property owner, OTR Adopt, as a nearby property owner, Mr. Kevin Pape as a nearby property owner, Frank Russell as a nearby property owner, Ms. Suzanne Furman as a resident and nearby property owner, and the Over the Rhine Foundation, a 33-year-old nonprofit organization and originator of the revised infill guidelines that you guys approved. Thank you. Also with me today is our counsel, who will be our counsel on this case, as well as any subsequent action moving forward. And we really appreciate the time you've given us to present our arguments today. Some battles are worth fighting and others aren't. This one is worth fighting because the project proposed is precedent-setting and consequential for Over the Rhine. Over the years, we have maintained a positive working relationship with Urban Sites, all of the party of record, including their contribution of a letter of support for the infill guidelines. However, in this matter, we fundamentally disagree with certain aspects of their proposed project in its current form. 6 years ago, we were all sitting here, almost all of you were here as well, in these same seats, and the same applicant had brought forward a proposal for a new development on 12th Street in Pendleton. At that time, there was significant community pushback. To your credit, you listened and ultimately denied approval of the project that day. About a year later, the applicant came forward with a new proposal that reduced the height of the infill to a more compatible scale with Pendleton and partnered with CMHA to incorporate bona fide affordable housing into development. And because of that, we now have a compatibly scaled building in Pendleton that provides housing for cooks, nurses, firefighters, and school teachers. It was a compromise for all parties that resulted in dramatic improvement over the original proposal. Now we find ourselves here again today. But in the intervening 6 years, your ability to objectively evaluate the infill proposals is now guided by criteria established in the revised infill guidelines for Over the Rhine, unanimously approved by this board, the Planning Commission, and City Council, and passed into law in 2023. So we come before you with expertise in that subject matter to help clarify and correct misinterpretations found in the staff report. Before we lay out our concerns, we first want to say that we do appreciate the spirit of the applicant's interest in developing this site and wanting to incorporate the Grammars Bar into the development. We also want to see housing development and economic development on vacant land in the Over the Rhine Historic District. But we've identified 3 areas of significant non-compliance with the guidelines and the zoning that have been overlooked, omitted, or otherwise misinterpreted in the staff report. So I'm now going to just go into those 3 areas of concern, one by one. So the first issue that we have, and it's been mentioned by staff, is the proposed 51-foot setback on Liberty Street. Now, both the guidelines for Over the Rhine and the zoning for this lot require that the property be built up to the property line on Liberty and Walnut. And in order to get approval for this setback, the applicant must receive both a COA, or guidelines, and a zoning variance. So let's start with the guidelines and the COA. Arguably, the most important chapters of the infill guidelines are the first 2 chapters, height, scale, and massing, and setback. And these 2 chapters address potential dramatic effects on the shape and feel of the historic district. The guideline for setback states, quote, buildings should be built with 0 setback from front lot lines, side street lot lines, and side alley lot lines. So according to the guideline, the development should be built to the corner of Walnut and Liberty. It's clear and unambiguous, and it's drawn from one of the most fundamental and noteworthy aspects of the district, which is that historical integrity of the block face is conveyed by densely built properties coming all the way to the sidewalk and creating a contiguous street wall. In strong contrast, the applicant is proposing a 51-foot setback from Liberty Street, which places the 215-foot long, 5-story portion of this infill squarely on the interior of Walnut Street, next to and across from its much smaller 2, 3, and 4-story historic neighbors. So rather than placing the largest volume of the infill on Liberty, a large arterial street where it would fit better, it encroaches into an interior block where it diminishes the historic human scale of the district surrounding it. In addition, and importantly, it creates a gap at Liberty and Walnut, discouraging pedestrian activity at that corner and on this block of Liberty, and discouraging the traffic calming of cars zooming down Liberty. And this gap is not for a public park or public amenity, but private outdoor space for the tenants of the building. Finally, placing a building of this magnitude on the interior of Walnut Street will permanently and forever alter the beautiful, one-of-a-kind aerial views of over the Rhine enjoyed from Ohio Park, Fairview Park, and other hillside vantage points. The main argument offered by staff and the applicant to support why there should be a 51-foot setback on Liberty Street is that the orientation of the proposed building is consistent with other historic buildings on the south side of Liberty due to the 1950s widening of Liberty Street. But page 7 of the revised infill guidelines, which is page 13 of the full guidelines, asks designers to pay close attention to the quote historic micro context, informed by looking at Sanborn maps to understand how to best situate infill buildings. And what we know, looking at that historic micro context in the Sanborn maps, is that there used to be buildings, more buildings to the north of this site, and that these buildings were built to the corner of Walnut and Liberty. Now, most of those buildings were demolished to make Liberty Street wider, and they've left these odd little gaps on the south side of Liberty. Now, first of all, those odd little gaps are much, much smaller than the 51-foot setback that is proposed here. But also, none of those oddly shaped gaps are even setbacks. They're just spaces left behind by demolished buildings. The same as the space left behind here that the applicant's now intending to fill with new construction. Everyone agrees that the wholesale widening of Liberty was an urban planning disaster. Yet the applicant argues that the sawtooth destruction of historic fabric on the south side of Liberty should be perpetuated. They argue that because Liberty Street was widened, leaving vacant space where buildings once stood, that vacant space left behind ought to be expanded even further, consistent with the widening of Liberty Street. Now, I want to say that during the 9 years of the Over the Rhine Foundation developing the revised infill guidelines, we held over 190 meetings with stakeholders, including architects, every developer, residents, and the city and city representatives. And never once, not once in the course of those meetings was it ever suggested that parcels on Liberty Street should have setbacks. That's totally new. Or that Liberty Street setbacks should be treated differently than any other street, or that the Liberty Street widening project was a part of the history of the district that should be preserved. That never came up once. In fact, we met with the applicant at least 4 times and appreciated their feedback, and the applicant's architect at least 6 times, and they never mentioned anything about setbacks on Liberty Street. So we believe strongly the guideline for setback for this site should be adhered to here. There should be 0 setback at Walnut and Liberty. But I'm gonna go to the second. That was the COA portion, the guidelines portion of what they are applying for. Supposing there's a compelling argument to overrule the guidelines on this issue, which we would disagree with. But even if you were to reject the setback requirements in the guidelines, there's still the zoning variance that the applicant has to obtain in this case. Chapter 1409-17 of the zoning code provides the building placement requirements for lots in this district, which is CNPT. And I think this has something to do with connected communities too. And like, you know, other neighborhoods, there's lots of other neighborhoods that have the same zoning in Cincinnati, where there's this rule that buildings, quote, must be built to the lot line on both Liberty and Walnut. So in other words, they must be built to occupy the corner, which is both sound urban design practice almost everywhere and not just historic districts. Because of this zoning requirement, the applicant is seeking the variance that I mentioned. And the requirements for variance are laid out in page 5 of the staff report, page 81 of the full packet, which comes from chapter 1435-05-4. There's 2 possible ways that one can obtain a zoning variance for this particular setback. The first one is dismissed outright by staff on page 5. So the only other rationale, the one that must be met in order to grant this variance, is that a 51-foot setback on Liberty Street is, quote, necessary and appropriate in the interest of historic conservation so as not to adversely affect the historic architectural or aesthetic integrity of the historic district. So it has to be necessary and appropriate in the interest of historic conservation. That is to say, the variance for the setback has to be necessary for historic conservation. Now, we've established that it's sound urban planning to build to the corner. We've established that the infill guidelines provide objective criteria for ensuring how new construction projects should be designed to conserve the historic integrity of the district. A 51-foot setback that goes against those conservation guidelines cannot be necessary for historic preservation. It just wouldn't be logical. And so not only is it unnecessary, it contradicts the principles of historic preservation for this district. Now, the argument's been made by the applicant that the Liberty Street widening means that we should preserve the mistakes of the 50s, and that it's important to preserve that resulting residual vacancy. But again, please note that the proposed setback is much, much larger than those 1950s gaps, as I've noted. And also, nowhere in any of the Over the Rhine nomination forms to the Secretary of the Interior, the Park Service, to the state of Ohio, nowhere in any of the guidelines or the zoning is it ever mentioned that the Liberty Street widening is part of a contributing resource for this district or something that's protected. So, in fact, everything that is protected in Over the Rhine, everything listed as a contributing building is from pre-1950. And the purpose of these regulations is to protect the actual resource, the urban immigrant district that has historic status. We are not here to protect a street widening project from the era of suburbanization and the automobile. And the city is actually interested in stitching the two halves of the neighborhood back together and correcting some of the wrong that was done years ago. Therefore, in conclusion on this issue, it cannot be the case that a large setback on Liberty Street that compounding the era of the 1950s is either necessary or appropriate for the historic conservation of Over the Rhine. And this is what the code clearly requires for a variance. The CNPT zoning is clear that buildings must be built to the corner, and a variance simply does not come close to meeting the letter of the law. That was the first argument. So take a deep breath and.
Should we have a 2-minute rule or something? No, I'm just
You got
Coming later.
had me going for a second. Trying to be entertaining for the audience, but it's probably not that riveting. But okay, so the second case, and I just realized I think I'm reading from. Anyway, the second issue of non-compliance with the rules is height. Specifically, the height of new construction where it abuts Grammars to the north. The first and only guideline for the height and massing chapter states, as staff mentioned, the height of new construction should not vary more than 1 story from adjacent contributing buildings. Now, we agree that where the development is 4 stories on the southern portion of the infill, it complies with the guidelines and it's appropriate. However, the height of the proposed northern volume is 5 stories where it meets Grammars. Grammars is only 3 stories. Thus, unequivocally, it varies by more than 1 story from the only adjacent contributing building. The staff report argues that the development should look for context to buildings on the north side of Liberty, where there are 2 4-story buildings, and that because this 5-story building is within 1 story of those buildings on the north side of Liberty, that it's appropriate. But there are 2 problems with this argument. First, the proposed building is not on Liberty Street. It's set back 51 feet from Liberty Street. If it were on Liberty at 5 stories and then stepped down to 4 stories to meet Grammars, we would have no objection. Secondly, the guideline says infill should not vary more than 1 story from adjacent contributing buildings. And again, the only adjacent contributing building is Grammars. The nearest 4-story building that was referenced, I think, is like a football field away. Now, the staff report concludes by approving the 5-story height, quote, by utilizing the context hierarchy found in the infill guidelines. And what it's saying is that the context hierarchy points us to context north of Liberty to grab additional context. But respectfully, this is a misinterpretation of the context hierarchy, which is on page 8 of the infill guidelines, page 14 of the full guidelines. And it states essentially that you look immediately to the block face for context. And only if there are fewer than 3 contributing buildings within the same block face do you then look across the street to grab additional historic fabric. And if you look across the street and there's still fewer than 3 buildings, then you would look to further blocks away like Liberty or 14th. But in this case, This block face of Liberty, as far as that 3-building threshold, there's actually 11 contributing historic buildings. You can see them there to the south on Walnut. And there's 11, so it doesn't come anywhere near to needing to go across the street for the context hierarchy in the guidelines. The last thing I want to say on height is that the Over the Rhine Foundation worked really, really hard when developing the revised infill guidelines to find a compromise for height that worked for everyone and would make it less controversial, so these types of disagreements wouldn't happen. And you guys encouraged us to do that. After 7 years of work, the last 2 years were spent almost exclusively on working on the height chapter. And we did find a compromise that seemed to work for everyone, which is that infill could be built to the tallest historic building within the block face. And we received letters of support from Urban Sites and Model Group and 3CDC. We thought we had all the buy-in and all obstacles removed. But when we got to Planning Commission, December 2022, they voted to excise the entire height chapter and approve the rest of the document, and without the height amendments. And that means that the old height guideline from 2003, which is just one sentence, is what was included in these revised infill guidelines. And that's all you have to use for your evaluation. And we ask that that guideline, at least that guideline be followed here. That's section 2 height. That was a little short. So, and thank you for your attention and listening. The final piece, the final issue we have with the proposal is, as you might expect, the demolition of 2/3 of the historic, iconic Grammer's Cafe building on Walnut Street. Now, the applicant also proposes to demolish several non-contributing mid-20th century additions, but that's not our concern. Our concern is the large portion of the contributing Grammer's building that would be torn down. Now, the rear 2/3 of Grammer's, the bar gets the attention, but the rear 2/3 of Grammer's is where the cafe of Grammer's Cafe was housed, accommodating the restaurant and meeting spaces. And a lot of our city's German history occurred in that building, in the rear 2/3 of that building. Up until a few years ago, in fact, the walls used to be covered in old photographs depicting the various societies and groups who used to meet there. All these historical photographs on the inside of the rear of the building. And I suspect the Wade family took them down, and I assume they're in safekeeping somewhere, but there is evidence in historical record of that. As far as the exterior, the rear 2/3 of Grammer's is constructed of historic brick, part of the fabric of Over the Rhine that makes it the largest collection of Italianate buildings in the country. All of the walls are original. The rear facade is unusually detailed with fairly ornate brick corbelling at the top. And this can be explained by the fact that Grammer's was an important building in the community, and the rear of the building was originally located on a public alley. So the applicant makes 2 arguments as to why they should be allowed to demolish the majority of Grammer's. I'm gonna separate those 2 arguments. The first is what we will call the non-significant portion argument, which you heard some in the staff argument, staff report. And that argument refers to a sentence on page 5 of the full conservation guidelines that says, quote, "Inappropriate additions, non-significant portions of a building, and non-contributing buildings may be demolished, provided the demolition does not adversely affect the integrity of a contributing building or the character of the streetscape or the district." The applicant attempts to argue that the rear 2/3 of Grammer's is non-significant, and that its removal would not adversely affect the integrity of a contributing building or the streetscape or the district. Now, this is a really unprecedented and dangerous argument. It requires one to accept that only high-style portions of a building can represent its significance. 40 years ago, this argument was not unheard of in cases like this, but our collective thinking about social and historic context and the important roles that function and traditional use play has evolved exponentially. The applicant maintains that the rear 2/3 of Grammer's is non-significant, along with the non-contributing contemporary additions. And again, we agree that the mid-century non-contributing additions are non-significant. We have no objection to their demolition. But the applicant argues that the only significant portion of Grammars is the facade due to its triangular pediment, elaborate cornice, etc. And both the applicant and staff report also claim that the first 32 feet of the building from the facade are significant due to the bar, tin ceiling, and tile flooring. But as you know, our historic districts say nothing about the interiors of buildings. The only thing that's regulated by this board is what is found in the exterior. And therefore, the applicant's argument amounts to saying that the only part of Grammars that is significant is the facade. Everything else is insignificant. Now, I think what's happening here is a bit of a misunderstanding of wording, because what they seem to be saying is that the facade is not that it's significant, but that it's the most significant or the most eye-catching portion of the building, and the rest of the building is not as ornate or eye-catching. And we wouldn't disagree that the facade is the most beautiful part of the building, but that doesn't mean that the rest of the building is non-significant. And that's what the standard guideline says. It says non-significant. It doesn't say a little bit less interesting or more utilitarian. Even the staff report never calls it non-significant or insignificant, instead referring to it as, quote, more utilitarian. But that's what Over the Rhine is. That's a bunch of utilitarian brick buildings with fancier facades. If we allow buildings in Over the Rhine Historic District to be arbitrarily divided into significant and non-significant portions, or utilitarian and ornate parts, it's obvious what will happen next. When a building owner decides they want a higher and better use for their lot, but it's obstructed by a historic building, they will come to you and argue that the facade of the building is a significant portion, everything else is non-significant, and they will try to have whatever portion is in their way demolished. It's known colloquially as a facadomy. The guidelines were intended to provide flexibility for truly non-significant portions of buildings. So think of a case where you have a large historic building and then behind it is a small one-story brick addition that was added later. Over the Rhine has many of these, and in this case, the guidelines would allow for flexibility for demolition of such an addition with a well-reasoned argument. So we vehemently disagree with the idea and the Pandora's box, the slippery slope of starting down that path of dividing contributing buildings into significant and non-significant. Let's, for the sake of argument though, say that we conceded that the rear 2/3 of Grammars is non-significant. The applicant then still has to prove that the demolition does not adversely affect the integrity of a contributing building or the character of the streetscape or the district. And that is not proven. In this case, again, a majority of the contributing resource is being proposed to be torn down. So the demolition of a majority of the contributing resource necessarily adversely affects the integrity of the contributing resource because most of it's being knocked, wiped out. The applicant and staff report insinuate that the integrity of the rear of this building has been irrevocably compromised by the contemporary additions. But that's just doesn't square with the eye test. You can go to the site, as I have done, and I've been inside the building, and this looks like any other vacant historic Over the Rhine building. All the original walls are there. It's in far better condition than most Over the Rhine shells that are getting rehabbed because it hasn't had extensive water damage. And maybe there was an opening created to connect to the contemporary additions, but that happens all the time in Over the Rhine. And if we tore all the contributing buildings down because they had an opening added, we wouldn't have a historic district left. So if this building has been altered to the point that it had lost its integrity, then it would be listed on the non-contributing list. But it's not on the list because it's still definitively a contributing building. Plus, there's a process for removing a building from the contributing list. No one's ever undertaken that process. No one's ever undertaken to prove that the rear 2/3 of an iconic Over the Rhine building should be removed from protected status. Therefore, I return to the bottom line. The demolition of the majority of an iconic historic building necessarily diminishes and adversely affects the integrity of that building as a whole. The applicant's argument simply fails. And finally, I just want to touch on the adverse impacts that would occur as a result of such a demolition to the character of the district as a whole, because it's been implied that there's no visibility anywhere else, right? It's like the back of the building isn't visible from Walnut, therefore almost like it doesn't exist. But what makes Over the Rhine special is we experience it in 3 dimensions, and we see that preponderance of old brick at all these different angles. And while the rear of the building may not be visible from Walnut, it's highly visible from Clay, which is a public thoroughfare. And even if the infill were built, the back of this building would still be highly visible. So so it would have adverse impacts on the district, of course. So that's the non-significant, what I call the non-significant portion of a building argument. This was their first argument for demolition. The second and final argument for demolition that the applicant makes is the economic hardship argument. And that comes from chapter 1435-09-2, section B. That's not mentioned in the staff report. And this section states that, quote, in determining whether the property owner has demonstrated an economic hardship, the Historic Conservation Board shall consider all of the following factors. And then there's 3 factors listed. So I just want to touch on the 3 factors. Number 1, and most importantly, will all economically viable use of the property be deprived without approval of the COA? Now, we already know the answer to this from page 5 of the staff report, page 81 of the packet, and I quote from the staff: "The denial will not result in the deprivation of all economically viable use." So I don't think I need to say any more on that. The staff agrees that all economically viable use of the property won't be deprived if they are not allowed to tear down the rear 2/3 of Grammars. Number 2, will the reasonable investment-backed expectations of the property owner be maintained without approval of the COA? We know that the answer to this is yes, because whatever investment-backed expectations the property owner had when they were acquiring the property, they could not have reasonably expected to be allowed to tear down the majority of an iconic historic building. The applicant, more than most, is well aware that this is a protected historic building within the Over the Rhine Historic District. No one in the district buys property with the reasonable expectation that they will be permitted to tear it down. Therefore, they could not have had a reasonable investment-backed expectation. And finally, the final point mentioned in the code is whether the economic hardship was created or exacerbated by the property. So if there's an economic hardship here, our contention is it's one created by the property. Because we already know that this historic building, the Grammars building in its entirety, can be profitably rehabilitated. We know this because there's a private market for these buildings. Many people want them. There's very little supply of them. And any number of people would love to own and revitalize this building, especially because of its iconic status in the community. In contrast, the applicant is proposing a very specific plan, which to succeed requires that the very historic building at the heart of the plan be majority demolished in service to reconstruction. So any claimed economic hardship was necessarily created by the property owner by virtue of the plan they created. In addition, the zoning code gives a few things that the historic board can also consider for this purpose. And one of them is whether there's been any listing of the property for sale by the owner. The property owner in their application says no. We, OTR Adopt, have made an offer on the property, which you'll find on page 181 of the full packet, and would be happy to fully rehabilitate the whole building. The zoning code also asks if the owner had knowledge of landmark designation at the time of acquisition. The answer to this is, of course, yes. They knew it was historic. And finally, the zoning code asks about any incentives or funding available to help preserve the resource. And we know that the applicant has not applied for historic tax credits for the Grammars building. Perhaps the greatest evidence that there is not an economic hardship here is the applicant's own submission on page 7 of the supplemental demolition analysis, page 133 of the full packet. The applicant states that Grammars is currently worth $169,520. That's their own statement of its value. Therefore, they are not claiming that Grammars in its entirety cannot be profitably rehabilitated. They are clearly admitting that it can, because if someone were willing to pay to acquire that building, it's because they see value in its rehabilitation. That's the conclusion of the 3 arguments, and I just have a short conclusion. But before I get to that, I do want to mention, we object spiritually and, what's the word I'm looking for? Not spiritually. We object philosophically to the construction of a 75 space parking lot. When there's just been a moratorium on new surface parking lots in the downtown development district, and it goes up to, I think, like 12th Street and over the Rhine, but stops, so it doesn't apply here. But like philosophically, we disagree that that's a good use of space here. There's currently green space in that the residents enjoy. And there's two variances or special exceptions the applicant's applying for that they need to make it even more surface parking space and less greenery in there. And we object to those, though I don't have time. There's not enough time to present you with arguments on that. We object for the record to the special exceptions for the parking areas. And then the last thing is just, we think it's an extraordinarily long and massive elevation on Liberty Street. And yeah, just should be broken up into smaller volumes, perhaps taking into account the fact there used to be an alley there bisecting the Liberty section and breaking the building into smaller volumes. Staff noted that balconies are not, should not be on a visible side of the building like that. And so we think balconies may be part of the problem. But just want to mention those 2 points, and then I'll get to the conclusion. Over the Rhine is special. As we speak, Sundance Film Festival is seriously considering moving to Cincinnati, largely due to the uniqueness of the Over the Rhine Historic District. Everyone here in this room is invested in the sense of history, beauty, and culture expressed in this community through the integrity of its built environment. As one of the largest, most intact urban historic districts in the US, Over the Rhine is a special place of national prominence. Although we are at a tipping point in which over 50% of the district's historic fabric is now gone, it remains evocative of its historic heritage. Why? Because our eyes look through vacant lot openings until coming to rest on 19th century hardscape. Once these openings are filled with 21st century design, our experience of Over the Rhine will be as much of a 21st century experience as it will be of a 19th century experience. Infill construction in these openings is both a required factor for growing community vitality and an inevitable change agent in terms of the community's historic character. Getting new infill construction right means managing that change in a way that ensures the district's historic character continues to be the prominent feature that defines the neighborhood and drives economic development by creating real estate and community value. The infill guidelines give us tools to manage character change and set the expectation that new construction will play a prominent but supporting role in maintaining integrity of the historic district. We ask that the HCB, as stewards of this special place, utilize the guidelines and the zoning rules as intended to reduce or eliminate the burden of ambiguity in the review process and deliver compatible new construction that enhances rather than detracts from community's historic character. Large-scale projects like this can coexist with the fabric of Over the Rhine and fit in. We believe that, but they are obliged to be designed in accordance with the rules. As we stated at the beginning, this is a large and precedent-setting project. It has implications for the interpretation of rules for demolition, setback, height, and parking moving forward. When these and other rules aren't followed, the integrity of OTR is irreparably damaged. I personally met with the developer 5 times. My takeaway from those meetings is there was no willingness to compromise on any of these issues. And so therefore we come to you and ask that you insist that the applicant adhere to the rules and that they choose to revise this project. Should they choose to revise this project, that the revisions are in compliance with the guidelines as approved by this board, planning commission, city council, and in compliance with the zoning laws we highlighted today. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And Madam Chair, if possible, I'd like to offer 2 documents into the record. One is the literal testimony I just gave, and the other is just a synopsis of that testimony.
I'll take a look. I realize there may be other members of the party of record that want to testify. Before that happens, Mr. Kreider, do you have any cross-examination?
I do. Thank you.
And then we're gonna do, because No, I can only.
I'm not gonna have too many questions. Let's start with the offer you mentioned. When was that submitted to the applicant?
To the applicant today,
What time?
shortly before the hearing.
Okay, have they accepted that offer?
No, I don't know.
Did that offer state that it was only open for acceptance until February 17th?
That's because the hearing was postponed. We were prepared for 2 weeks
You
ago.
could have delivered that offer anytime, couldn't you?
It's a lot to organize to respond.
Isn't that offer already in the record, the written document?
I believed that it also needed to be submitted to the applicant.
Right, or it wouldn't be an offer, would it?
Exactly.
Do you think they're gonna accept that offer, in your opinion?
Do you think they're gonna accept that?
I've asked you the question. You're not asking me the questions. I'm asking you
I
the question.
doubt it.
Okay, I doubt it as well. But that's not a serious offer if it's already, the time to accept is already passed, hasn't it?
No, I disagree. It's a very serious offer.
But it can't be accepted as written.
It's demonstrated to prove that there are folks in the private market willing to rehab this building.
Okay. Do you own any abutting property, or does OTR Adopt own any abutting property to the site, to the applicant
I
site?
believe the applicant owns all of the abutting property.
But OTR Adopt does not, and you personally do not?
No.
Okay. Let's talk about the guidelines for a minute. Let's talk about the demolition guidelines. Page 5 of the OTR guidelines. This is the original guidelines, not the new construction and infill guidelines. On the paragraph on demolition, does it talk about portions of a building?
I don't have the guidelines.
You can read it. Read the first line, please. Right here.
No building.
No, right here. Start with number 1.
What do you- what's
Just read the first
question?
line, please.
You want me to read it?
Well, I'll read it. If you can't read it, I'll read it. Okay. I'm going to read this into the record, just so we have the record. Inappropriate additions, non-significant portions of a building. So do the guidelines talk about portions of a building? Yes or no?
You just read that they do.
I'm asking you, because they do talk about portions of a building.
That one mention.
That's right. And that's in the context of allowable demolition, is it not?
No.
Okay, I'll read the other part. No building or part of a building may be demolished except as provided below. And the part I just read you is the part below, correct? Okay, thank you. Because I know you know you know these guidelines better than I do. So I'm just making sure that we are on the same page here. It sounds like we are. Let me also point you to page 7 of the infill and new construction guidelines. I think it's page 7. It is page 7. So this was, I think this was in the materials you submitted, talking about vacant sites, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And does it not discuss that if there is insufficient extant historic context within the block face, developers and designers should expand their study to the opposing block face and additional block faces in either direction? You helped write that, didn't you?
But then there's a definition for insufficient extant historic context.
Does it also say it's helpful to review Sanborn fire insurance maps?
No,
Is that's in the guidelines, is it not?
Yes.
Okay, right. So the building, the new building is built perpendicular to Walnut Street. Isn't it true that the Sanborn maps for that location had buildings that were built perpendicular to Walnut Street? Is that true? At that location?
The buildings at the corner of Liberty?
Not at the corner, in the location of the new proposed building. What would the Sanborn map show us? We can pull them up on the screen if we need to.
They show buildings fronting on Walnut Street.
Perpendicular to Walnut, correct?
Yeah.
So the only building that was of an odd shape would be today in the current right-of-way of Liberty Street. Is that correct? Okay. That's all I had on that point. Now, the guidelines use the word should with regard to setbacks, do they not?
Correct.
It's true that the guidelines say that the building should be built to the street corner,
That's correct.
but they do not mention Liberty Street at all, do they?
They don't mention any specific street.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Height. Isn't it true that the parapet and the cornice of the existing Grammer's building do reach up into the 4th story?
I would not make that
Can
statement.
we look at a photo, please?
Four-story buildings on our block face.
Right.
You can see our block face.
Yeah. We could, maybe we can use a drawing, Doug, if we don't have a photo of that. It's okay. Because I think it'll also point out another point about heights of some other buildings on the block face. That's probably the right one. Okay. So is there a substantial cornice on the Grammer's building? And a pediment?
Yeah, there's a triangular pediment
Yes. And it reaches up into the 4th story, does it not?
into the 4th story.
Yes, as measured against the new construction.
I mean, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Like, it reaches higher than the top of the
Yeah.
3rd story, yes.
Okay. And are there any other 4-story buildings on that block,
On the block or the block face?
on block face?
Yes, further south.
Okay. That's all I had on that point. You mentioned that a lot of German history occurred in the building, and in the back part of the building. Is the interior of the building protected at all by the guidelines?
No, it is
No,
not.
it's not. Visibility, isn't it true that the corbelled area on the back of the Grammer's building, 1442 Walnut, historically, before the demolitions around it, would only have been visible from a blind, dead-end alley, unnamed alley, 10 feet in width?
That's true of every building built on
Yes.
the interior.
And isn't it also true then that the guidelines provide on page 5, we're coming back, and that'll be my last question, that in reviewing demolition, that we would look at whether it adversely affects integrity or streetscape. So it is your position that the rear portion adversely affects the streetscape if it's taken down?
There's 3 prongs to that guideline.
Mhm.
I addressed 2 of the 3, the adverse impact to the contributing building itself and to the district. We do not have any claims about the adverse impact to the Walnut streetscape.
Does it use the word or, not and, in those prongs? Aren't they all to be looked at individually?
They're all to be looked at.
Okay. But it doesn't use the word and, it uses the word or. So are they to be investigated separately or as a whole?
I think they're to be investigated to determine whether there's any adverse impact to any of those things.
Okay. No more questions for Mr. Klingler?
I need a break, so I always forget, we need to actually do a motion to take a short break.
Moved.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Yeah, I've been in and out of, I was out of the office.
Great.
Okay, everyone, we're gonna get going again. Use my gavel.
I'll take a couple photos, man.
Can you get a motion to go back into session, please?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So I believe that we are still hearing the case from the party of record. I will continue with that in a minute. Just wanted to give an update for those of you who are still hanging out, waiting for public comments. We're gonna finish the party of record case and any cross-examination, and then it will be time for public records. So your time is coming soon. So I think the next thing is, Mr. Robert Klingler, if you have any additional witnesses that you would like to call for your case, we'll proceed.
I have two others, thank you. The first would be Frank Russell.
So I'm gonna go with the public comment.
Oh, okay. Then Suzanne Furman.
Hello.
Nice to meet you all, and I'm really happy to be here. I'm also nervous, but I care a lot about this. And
Yeah, just
sorry about that.
Keep it
I
simple.
will.
You know, you're very passionate, so just address this as you will. If you can try to keep it to new information, that would be great. But again, understand your passion for this.
Thank you, and I know it's 2 minutes, so thank you for that. And just before I started, there was a petition that we worked on for this, so I wanted to submit that too, if that's okay. And we could give a digital copy also, so I don't know what I'm doing, but yeah, so this was a petition
Is
that
this brand new information, or is this something that was been submitted before?
I don't think it's been submitted before because we were just working on this. It's actually been online for less than 24 hours.
Would you like to view it before you object?
No, it was being worked on less than 24 hours before the hearing.
Could you stand and?
Yeah. If it was just being worked on prior to the hearing, I'm gonna object because it's irrelevant to the hearing now because the materials were already submitted. So it's prejudicial. It's just, I could go out and get a petition for this and get 10 times that many names on it. We're not gonna go down that road.
Can I ask a question? Is this not the petition that was Cassandra sent out earlier?
I have no idea. And I could mention a little about what the petition is, if that's helpful, because I know I'm just bringing this as a person that lives nearby. So this is a petition to the Historic Conservation Board. 33 people signed the petition. It's on Action Network. It's basically talking about the need for housing instead of parking lots. So it's specifically about that issue with a group called Civic Cincinnati. We actually had the representative here, but she had to go because, you know, we're all young and mostly employed and have things to do.
I believe this may have been distributed to us earlier today, so we'll check into that.
Thank you so much. And just to mention, I was saying 33 people signed it. It was online for less than 24 hours, and it includes 25 comments. Some of it's unclear in the printed version, just because it was formatting and, you know, like that, so we could submit the.
Another list.
I think this is just the readout of the petition, the respondent. I think that's clear. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. So I do have like a 2-minute testimony that I'd love to give. My name is Suzanne Furman. So I'm a property owner and resident in OTR, about 2 blocks from this property. I learned about the work of OTR through some of the best restaurants that I've ate at. I was even at an establishment last night that they, that they developed. Anyway, I'm a big fan of that and the work that they're doing to save some of these historic buildings. So yes, I'm a proud resident of Over the Rhine. In 2023, I bought a historic property on Sycamore Street. It's 1417 Sycamore Street. It was built in 1870. And I purchased this condo because I wanted to be part of the historic district that helps preserve what makes this neighborhood special. I love living in an urban environment where I can walk and bike everywhere. Over the Rhine is one of the few places where that's still possible, where community, culture, and history come together in a mixed income neighborhood. And the property that is going down near Melindy and Clay, that's my bike route every time I leave my house because it's the quiet street. And that's why I oppose this development as it's currently written in violation of these several guidelines and COAs. While I support responsible growth and affordable housing, this project disregards the guidelines that are meant to protect our historic district. So the demolition of 2/3 of the Grammars building sets a dangerous precedent. If we allow developers to define only the most ornate parts of a building as significant, we risk losing the fabric of OTR, which is why I purchased my property here. I'm from Hamilton, Ohio, and I lived outside the US for a long time, but I came back and I bought a property here. The 51-foot setback from Liberty and Walnut breaks the 0 setback rule. It disrupts the streetscape. It leaves a large chasm on Liberty, and the new building's height exceeds the allowed limit, so it's towering above the Grammars building. And the excessive amount of private parking is out of scale for an urban neighborhood, prioritizing cars over walkability and historic integrity. And I'd love to speak more about that, but I don't have time. I think that the board should hold this project accountable to the guidelines and zoning rules that protect over the Rhine. And I believe that we can have development and preservation, and it's not an either or choice. And I just wanted to mention also that I did call some of the people that provided the letters of support for this project. And I also noted that many of them are like form letters, like some of them say your name here, and then they sign their name after that. The people I called were not aware of the zoning regulations that were going to be violated. And so I think, you know, I just wanted to say that just about the letters, but I thank you a lot for your time.
Mr. Kreider, do you have cross-examination?
Yes. No cross-exam.
Mr. Robert Klingler, do you have additional witnesses that you would like to call?
No additional witnesses, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move into public comment, but first I think we did have the printed copies or duplicates of what Danny Klingler.
That's right, the attorney's been given.
Okay, so you've been given that statement. Do you object to those statements being entered into the record?
I object to portions of it because it's there's a lot of testimony and written material about things that didn't make it into the guidelines, so I think that's prejudicial. On that basis, I'll object to hearing this.
Board's discretion whether to admit.
I think it would be helpful to have most of the testimony in the record, so I will admit it and distribute it to the board. Okay, we will move into public comment. I'm going to go in the order that people signed in. I'm terrible at reading handwriting, so I apologize in advance if I mess up your name. Fern Tan?
She's not here. I do have her testimony and it is 2 minutes if we could read it, but she had to leave.
Unfortunately, we won't be able to accept that. Suzanne Furman?
That's me.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Getting the names all mixed
It's a
up in my
little
head.
German, but yeah.
Let's see. Daniel Magura. Would you like to come forward and add some testimony?
Sure.
We do have a 2-minute limit, so Sandra is going to try to keep us honest. If you could just state your name much better than I just did, that would be helpful.
That's right, I can try. My name is Daniel Noguera. I am, my address is 1800 Race Street. I am a resident of OTR. I also own a business in OTR and also outside OTR. I'm here to support the project. We do have business on Walnut Street, and it's part of my route. We do understand how that corner specifically has been forgotten for so many years, and it's becoming one of those real difficult places for OTR to keep development. So in our side, I think more density is needed in the size of the project, and also with the conservation of the facade of the buildings, in my personal opinion, looks well enough to keep OTR moving in the right direction and keep the economy developing also in the right directions, which we have seen in the last few years that it has been a decline for the business owners in OTR.
Thank you. Jeremy Moore? Jack Weston?
Hi, thanks for the time. Jack Weston, 545 Evanswood Place. Also property owner at 1335 Pendleton Street in Pendleton, and business owner in Over the Rhine. Just want to kind of start. Thank you all. Thank you for both sides, stakeholders. I think this process is fascinating, obviously, for those of us who are not here often, and really appreciate the knowledge and and passion that both sides bring. I'm opposed to your position, but I think the fact that the process exists is awesome. I won't get into those details because I don't have that knowledge, so I'm not going to speak to the very specific pieces of the legislation. But I'll just say, as a property owner and a business owner, more kind of to tack on to what Mr. Noguera said. Over the Rhine is I've been in Over the Rhine for 15 years as a resident and a business owner, and we've had our heyday, but it is declining. And I know that might not be the perception of a lot of folks, but there's a lot of empty storefronts. There's been a lot of turnover in the storefronts. I don't know the stats on residential, but I'm assuming that it's getting a little bit more challenging to rent places out, although beautiful places like this. So my comments are a little more anecdotal. I have one data point in terms of business. My business is down about 50% from the peak about 6-7 years ago. That's substantial. The traffic in the neighborhood is different. So my biggest concern about this project and other projects like it is just the delay. Having to go through this, having to redesign, taking 2-3 more years to build this project. We need the density, as we've talked about. We need the connection to north of Liberty. We need the connection from Maine to Vine. And delaying that further, I think hurts business owners. I think it hurts property owners. I'm currently trying to sell a property in Over the Rhine, and it's not been as easy as you might think at the time. So I got 14 seconds. I think I got one more point. Yeah, the best path, in my opinion, is not to get into the weeds of the details. I think it's a beautiful project. I trust Urban Sites' expertise. I know they've been a great stakeholder and tried, so I support the project. Thank you.
Could I ask a question? Do you mind, could COVID to some degree be why your business is dropping off?
I'm sorry?
Could COVID be?
Absolutely. A lot of factors. Actually was a business owner of 2. We've actually closed once since COVID, which the traffic never came back from pre-COVID. The other one is seen a substantial decline, but it's, many factors. Lots of, as negative news at times that's, factual or not factual that has caused us. Thank you. Challenges. Sure.
Frank Russell?
I'm going to limit my comments to a specific procedural aspect of producing the guidelines. You might remember that this board approved the infill height guidelines that set maximum height to be reflective of heights existing on the block face as a whole, originally in our original submission. This was to remove ambiguity and the impact of odd exceptions like a singular one-story building that you might find on a block after your unanimous approval of the guidelines in 2019, but before the Planning Commission hearing of 2020, conservation staff insisted on reverting the height guideline to what we have now, which is no more than 1 story above adjacent. And this was what was approved by the Planning Commission against our objections. Today, staff is overlooking what they asked for in 2020 and widening the definition of adjacent on Walnut to a much broader context when it should be limited to what is stated, the abutting buildings only. So we find ourselves in this conundrum because of a request from staff to eliminate the height guideline, which is arguably one of the most important guidelines of any of the infill guidelines for Over the Rhine. So my comment here has more to do with how we move forward on this. I invite the board to request staff to revisit the height guideline and determine whether we do need an additional amendment to make the height guideline more circumspect in how you will be able to analyze. And in the process of doing that, I think had we done that before, I think we would have avoided some of the ambiguity we have in this project, and it would certainly improve things going forward.
Chantel Noble, did you have anything else to add other than on behalf of the applicant?
Do we get a chance to talk again at the end, or how does
Will as the applicant?
Okay. Then I'll let Deanna.
Okay. Robert Selhorst?
He left.
Okay. Myra Greenberg.
Can I sit here? Okay. Hello, everyone. Madam Chair, thank you, and hello, everyone. My name is Myra Greenberg. I have lived in the Over the Rhine Historic District probably close to 30 years now, and have been involved in a lot of historic preservation issues and matters. Just a couple of things I would like to remind you. The Grammars Cafe was considered so important to this so-called development that the LLC that they created is called Grammars Place. And then they come back and want to demolish, dump it into the landfill to over half, 2/3 of it. I find that kind of appalling in so many ways. Another thing, what I understand, the pediment on top of Grammars Cafe does not count as a story. So Grammars is 3 stories, not 4 stories. Another thing, I do agree with Mr. Doug Owens when he said basically that there's no regulatory taking. There would be no wipeout, no total wipeout if the Grammars Cafe building was spared in its entirety, and that there were other places on the huge number of parcels for other apartments to be located. So there wouldn't be any regulatory taking, no economic wipeout. There's been no facts or proof that the building, Grammars building, is beyond just normal repair, modern updates like any other historic old building would need to have. I think that it should be spared. And I hope that you will not nullify all the laws and rules and regulations that apply to saving this very important building. I thought it was interesting, said that the other historic buildings are deteriorating fast, so we need to get on with it. But getting on with it is demolishing one last historic building. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Christy Samat. Greg Badger.
Bob Selhorst is back.
Oh,
Did I get called?
you did. Would you like to?
Speak?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Sorry, I didn't want to take it.
Thanks for holding for me. My name's Bob Selhorst. I'm a OTR resident at 2019 Elm Street and a small business operator as well. My testimony today is in support of the Lockhart Park project. This project respects the philosophy and the spirit of the historic guidelines of OTR. And I would counsel the Historic Conservation Board to not let esoteric, nebulous arguments stop another project, another market rate project in OTR. This Byzantine labyrinth of regulations is why many large developers flee this neighborhood and are fearful of trying to get a project off the ground because of the nebulous arguments that pop up virtually out of nowhere. This is a $33.2 million project that will create 116 market rate apartments, 4,522 square feet of restaurant and bar space, and 71 parking spaces. For too long, this area has been a glaring gap of vacant lots and declining historic buildings. This type of investment is desperately needed to connect the southern half of OTR to the neighborhood north of Liberty Street. The opportunities to rehabilitate the historic Grammars restaurant space cannot be missed. It's sat here vacant for as long as I've lived in the OTR area, which is about 15 years. Various projects have come before and talked about doing it. Nobody had the wherewithal to do it. Now we do. For too long, the lights of OTR's historic Grammars restaurant have been dark. Your yes vote today will help to turn on the lights at Grammars and once again bring a light of development on this important part of Walnut Street and our OTR neighborhood. Urban Sites is a trusted developer who has been renovating historic buildings in this neighborhood for decades. As a resident and as a small business owner living and working in OTR near this proposed site for the last roughly 15 years, I urge you to issue a certificate of appropriateness. Thank you.
Daniel Jones.
To the chair, I'm simply city staff from the Department of Community Economic Development. I'm just available for any questions. I prepared the economic hardship analysis, and if the board has any questions with respect to that analysis, I'm happy to answer.
I have a question. Is this market rate or is it income capped?
This is a market rate development.
This is a market rate.
Yes.
Thank you, because I've heard both ways. Thank you.
Okay, where was I? Tony, oh no, wrong one.
A nanny, N-A-N-Y?
Stewart, chicken scratch for Stewart.
Oh, okay, Stewart. I see it now.
Good evening at this point. So my name is Stuart Naney, 1405 Walnut Street. I'm a property owner, business owner, and historic redeveloper in the area. I ask you to look at Urban Sites and Tri-Versity's proud histories and all that they have done for the neighborhood. They've proven themselves time and time again as good neighborhood stewards, and the Lockhart is the next chapter in their histories. The project will add to the housing stock, reduce blight, bring jobs and businesses to the neighborhood, positively contributes to the streetscape. Unfortunately, progress does not always look the same to everybody. Looking back in 20 years, I believe no rational person would look at the Lockhart and think it was anything but appropriate progress. I believe most residents and community organizations are in support of this transformative project. This is evident by documented support from the Over the Rhine Community Council, Over the Rhine Chamber of Commerce, Over the Rhine Community Housing, the Brewery District, Cincinnati Preservation Association, Cincinnati Development Fund, 3CDC, Model Group, Art Academy, the Bagelry, Uptown Arts, Crossroad Health Center, Aladdin, Snow Commerce, Agar, Lucius Q, Taste of Belgium, Collective Espresso, City Center Properties, Crown Restaurant Group, Platt Architecture and Design, Cinema OTR, Motor, Woodward Theater, and Levine Properties. Additionally, the HCB staff already recommends approving all of the variances and certificates of appropriateness. As stated in their findings, that the proposed work is necessary and appropriate and in the historic interest of historic conservation so as not to adversely affect the historic, architectural, or aesthetic integrity of the historic district. The neighborhood and HCB experts have already stated their support for this project. I too support the zoning variances and certificate of appropriateness. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. John Walter.
Hello, I'm John Walter. I've been doing small development and property management and such in the Clotter-Conroy neighborhood of Over the Rhine since the early 80s, and I live there now. I'm the secretary of the Over the Rhine Community Council, and I just wanted to read a really short letter of support. Dear Mayor, City and City Councilors, Over the Rhine Community Council voted to send a letter of support to the city regarding Urban Sites Grammars project at Walnut and Liberty in the Over the Rhine. Urban Sites has shared project details 5 times recently with the Over the Rhine Community Council and public forums on this project. The Urban Sites motion at the Over the Rhine Community Council member meeting to send a letter of support was passed 32 yes, 10 no, 0 abstentions. I'd also like to talk about the setbacks. If you think about it, all the way from Reading to Central Parkway on the south side of Liberty, I walk it every day. There's not one building that's up against the sidewalk. And that stretch there where they're proposing this project, when I walk there, it's not the safest feel right now. It's just a void. And a void, there's not good things that comes from avoided development. As far as the height goes, I was involved in these infill guidelines. I probably went to countless meetings, 15 or 20 meetings over, I don't know how many years. And at the beginning, there were tons of people involved in these meetings, like 50 people or so. And it kind of dwindled down just because it wore people out. And so many people talked about Liberty and Central Parkway being unique to Over the Rhine, and because of their thoroughfares. And look at the buildings that are on Liberty and Central Parkway. Think about it, the heights and all. And I think the historic guidelines should absolutely reflect, because there's lots of potential development, especially along Liberty, reflect some uniqueness. Thank you.
Mike Bash.
Hey, everybody. I'm Mike Bash. I'm a resident of 2009 Elm Street in Over the Rhine. I also own 1405 Walnut, which is as close to this property as a property could be. You heard from my business partner, Stuart Naney. I've lived in Over the Rhine for almost 15 years. I personally have saved maybe 8 buildings now. Just finished the Moorline Mansion on Mulberry Street. Spent a year and a half of my life turning that into 13 apartments, or 9 apartments, and then we're about to start 13 apartments on 2 buildings that were slated to be torn down in the West End. We currently exist in the sub $2 million project cost, and I'm super jealous of Urban Sites to be able to pull off projects of this magnitude. I completely agree that I think that Danny, his passion is admirable, but I begin to question if it is more so intended in chasing off development as it is in making sure that projects adhere to the guidelines. Some of the guidelines are so intense that if we make a project adhere to all of the guidelines, some of them might not even be economically feasible. I would imagine as a property developer that top floor of the tallest is to make it so that the building is financeable. You know, if there aren't enough units in this project, then a bank will not lend on the property. And so in summary, I've lived in Overline for 15 years. I actually live very close to Elm and Liberty. And, you know, I think that was held up for years and years and years. And this is another corner that is just kind of a blight on the neighborhood. Last point is the parking lot right next to our property, which is on Walnut. I would say that since we finished that building a year and a half ago, we have probably had at least 70 times that our tenants' cars windows have been broken out. And this is just 3 people in that parking lot. That area needs people. It needs people living there. It needs people calling the police. And it's not a great area, honestly. And so we could use this.
Beth Johnson.
Hello, board. Good to see you all. I am Beth Johnson. I am Executive Director for Cincinnati Preservation. We are Greater Cincinnati's nonprofit organization focused on using advocacy, education, and community building to further historic preservation in our region. I am speaking on behalf of our board, and I'm speaking in support of the zoning variances and the certificate of appropriateness for the design of the new construction and rehabilitation of the existing buildings. We support the staff recommendation, and Cincinnati Preservation also supports the Community Council in their voice and vote to support the project. When I was working for the city, we had developers approach us to redevelop the site, wanting to clear the site as they stated it was too difficult to incorporate existing buildings into a new development. This development has achieved what they were unable to do. They're being able to both reuse existing buildings and provide context-sensitive infill. This development fills in sites that have been left vacant through previous demolitions and brings back vitality to the consistent street wall. Seeing the broad reach of support for this development from both for-profit entities such as Model Group and the various small businesses that are even here today, as well as nonprofit organizations such as CDF, OTRCH, and Crossroads Health Center, and especially the Over the Rhine Community Council, shows that this development is providing much needed diversity of housing and commercial spaces to increase the density and economic activity for the neighborhood. Historic preservation is about balancing development with the reuse and rehabilitation of our historic structures. This proposal shows that historic preservation and new development can work together by incorporating design elements from existing historic buildings into new construction, repurposing older historic structures for new uses, and ensuring new development respects the scale and character of historic districts, creating a harmonious blend between the old and new while still allowing for the necessary growth and revitalization that Cincinnati desperately needs. Thank you.
Chris Cullen. I'm sorry?
Chris Heichel. My handwriting's pretty bad. That might be Fuller Street.
Are you on Fuller Street? Okay, I would have never gotten that, but.
My kindergarten teacher couldn't either. I'm here in Chris Heichel, 1137 Fuller Street. I'm here in my capacity as a neighborhood stakeholder. I lived in Over the Rhine for 12 years, 7 years within 2 blocks of this development. 3 of them on Main and 14th, 2 of them Walnut and 14th, 3 of them Walnut and 1600 block of Walnut, just north of Liberty. So in all, I've lived within 2 blocks of this for a fifth of my life. The area is badly in need of transformation. There is no safe walkable route from anywhere within that radius that I just described to Finley Market. There's no safe walkable route from Rhinegeist or Finley Market down to that area. You can't walk from Ziegler Park to Washington Park without walking through a bunch of that. And it's all blight. When I was living on the 1600 block of Walnut Street, I had 3 neighbors, person immediately to my left, person immediately to my right, the building across from me. Everything else was blight. And everything for 2 blocks was blight if you walk south from there. The fact that they want to come in and put their money into this, all power to them, because it's completely unlivable. It's people dealing drugs, loitering, littering, getting into street fights, constant shootings at Grant Park, which that is the end of this corridor. We've got to stitch North and South OTR together. We've got to stitch the 1500 block of Walnut up with the 1400 block. We've got to make it one neighborhood again. This is transformational in my opinion, and we've got to have that kind of transformation. See if we have any other notes here. The only other thing I'll say is just, you know, over here they had said the city's interested in stitching together the 2 halves of Liberty Street. I agree. It is scary to walk from the 1400 block of Walnut up to Grant Park or up to Finley Market. We've got to stitch that all together. And that's my point, and I agree with them completely. We got to get it done. I think this should be approved.
Anthony Zytek.
I think he's gone.
Okay. Julie Clayton.
She left.
Daniel Rosewild. Danielle, I'm sorry.
All right. Sure. Trying to stitch together my thoughts. Also nervous. Hello. I'm actually not a resident of Cincinnati proper. I'm in the suburbs of Fairfield. I'm here on behalf of some friends that could not be here, and also to speak my voice of my experience here. I'm going to move to my notes so that I can have more coherent expression. Good afternoon. My name is Danielle Rosewild, also known as Ellie. If you see anything in there, it's also my name. I learned about this project over the weekend, and I reached out to a number of my friends to join us today that live and work in OTR, mostly in the restaurant scene that I've met since joining a group called Wine Crew in 2021, which meet at Lost and Found on 14th Street. A number of these folks I reached out to would have loved to be here, but were unable to adjust their schedules at the last minute. I'm here to offer my voice in their absence. I grew up myself in the suburb of Fairfield, and I rarely spent time here in the city outside of museums, zoos, and the occasional Reds game. Since I moved back in 2020, after being away for over a decade, I finally am able to explore the city and get to know its beauty and its rich history. While I support the need for new housing, I'm deeply troubled by Urbansight's request to build the 75-car surface lot and 51-foot setback for a private patio. It's devastating to immediate and long-term density, walkability, and charm of this historic neighborhood. It's one of the few areas where residents can safely bike. Introducing 75 new cars to the area would be devastating to the vibrancy of the community, making the area louder, dirtier, and visits to the park less safe and pleasant. Additionally, I don't think that the setback should be granted, as I don't think people would actually use the private patio. It's too loud. The nearby bar with the hot dog mural that also has a nice seating area off Liberty that's never used because of the cars. If Urbansights wanted the patio, they could do so behind the building on the clay side. But I think we're all facing the reality that no one wants to hang around cars. If we build for cars, more cars will come. I would love to see. Thank you for your time.
You can finish that thought. Not that strict around here.
I would love to see development that rewards car-free and car-light living. Urbansights needs to build for the people who want to grow their community. Thank you.
Kirsten Dockendorf.
Did it right.
Oh my wow. 1 out of
Not an easy
20.
name.
People I've worked with for years and still don't get it right. Good evening. I'm Kirsten Dockendorf, and my address is 441 Elm Street in Ludlow, Kentucky. But until April of last year, my home was 1420 Main Street in Over the Rhine. I'm speaking today in support of OTR Adopt and the preservation of grammars. I lived and worked in Over the Rhine for nearly a decade and know firsthand how important this neighborhood is and what makes it unique. Over the Rhine needs more affordable housing, not more market rates. It's not just about new buildings, it's about preserving the history, charm, and character of the area. Thoughtful development can coexist with that history. We don't need to lose one to gain the other. Grammars is a key part of Over the Rhine's legacy. It's a gathering place that's hosted everything from the Midpoint Music Festival to our beloved Bachfest. And while it might have not been featured in movies like Rain Man, Cincinnati's distinctive architecture has attracted filmmakers. The upcoming Superman film was filmed at Union Terminal, as well as Robert De Niro's The Alto Kings and the Oscar-nominated Carol used landmarks like the Netherlands Plaza Hotel. These movies highlight what makes our city unique. In preserving landmarks like Grammars does more than protect history. It's an economic asset that continues to bring value to the city. The new building, proposed new building, towers at 5 stories while Grammars is only 3. This is disrupting the visual harmony that defines Over the Rhine. We want a streetscape that feels like it belongs in a movie, not a mismatched eyesore that could hurt the charm and revenue this area generates. This isn't just about one building, it's about the future of Over the Rhine. Let's ensure the new development respects its history, character, and the future. Thank you.
I'm at the end of the list. Is there anyone here who came to speak and did not get the opportunity? Okay, so a little housekeeping. In a moment, the applicant will have a chance to make a rebuttal, and then the interested party will have a chance to do a closing, and then the applicant will have a chance to do the closing. I did skip asking the board if we had any questions for the applicant or the party of interest. So now would be that time if you do, or staff.
I've got a couple questions. First to staff, the applicant. You guys can come up. I can be a second. Staff, very quick. Do you know what the average building width height is on Walnut? Building width of Walnut contributing buildings are?
No, not
Like Over the Rhine, it's typically like 30 to 40 feet.
Yeah, I'd say 25.
You have regulations, you have info guidelines to address the granularity of that kind of average frontage.
Yeah, I mean, it's all within like the massing and rhythm sections to try to be compatible with the context of the block face.
I can answer that question. The one building on the south that we're thinking is about 35 feet wide, if that helps you. The one, our southernmost building that we're renovating as part of the development is about 35 feet wide.
Chantel, could you stand and introduce yourself for the record?
I'm Chantel Noble from City Studios.
Thank you very much, 35 feet. And then second, can you just confirm, is the rear of Grammars on our non-contributing list of buildings?
No.
Okay. For the development team, can you go to the site plan of first floor, the commercial and parking schematic, please? That's a very simple question. In the pink section where it says Grammars, in between Grammars and the bar restaurant space, what is that? Is that part of the, what is that?
Those next to Grammars between the pink space that says bar restaurant is existing historic buildings that are remaining and will be part of the Grammar, part of the restaurant bar.
So what I'm trying to wrap my head around here is the current configuration of Grammars is there's a storefront and there's a back kitchen and a dining hall and stuff like that. So the current, I measured this,
It's about 15 to 16 feet in depth, is that correct? From the front of the entrance to the corridor?
It's 32 feet deep from the sidewalk on Walnut, 32 feet.
From the entrance of the building?
Entrance of the
to
building
corridor?
to the corridor,
Okay.
which is to the back of all of those buildings.
So if you intend to lease the space, is this gonna be a bar-only space, or is it part of the restaurant? Is there gonna be a hood involved, or?
There will be, so we have two interested parties in the commercial space and then reactivating Grammer's Bar. One is a bar and restaurant. In the bar and restaurant case, there will be a hood involved, and we are working to locate that within the new construction part of the commercial space. Both prospects also want to activate the Rathskeller and really bring life back to what was the historic Grammer's Bar. We're really excited about both.
Cool.
And the Rathskeller, in case anyone is not aware, is when you walk into Grammer's, you go to the south and you go down the stairs and occupy the lower level.
So the lower level will be preserved for the building? Is that the same for
Yes.
the part that's being demolished, or is that to be filled in for the new construction?
If you go to, there's a site diagram. The rear portion of Grammer's that will be demolished is new construction will be partially on top of that footprint,
Okay.
if that makes sense. Okay. Yeah, that one.
We've heard some commentary about facing out the facade on Liberty Street. Is there any kind of, what was the determination as to not being able to meet the street frontage in your guys's?
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
In your interpretation, why are you not meeting the Liberty Street facade side?
So, we have been pretty passionate about how this building is placed along Liberty. Before I talk about that, I would like to say, because I know that there was some comments in Danny's comments about the zoning code and the guidelines are not absolute on this location and zero setback. The zoning code does allow us to ask for a variance, so we have made the decision to locate the building where it is located on that site plan. And so by virtue of being able to request a locational variance, it is something that is considered. And then also the guidelines do use the word should. In the guidelines, there is a whole page on the wording of the musts and the shoulds and the mays. And should is used in the context of demolition and in the context of the location along the sidewalk. So I think that's important to point out. But our team, the placement of the building was very deliberate, and we feel strongly that it is compatible and appropriate. And frankly, to us, it just makes sense that it's located where it is. This empty site is really unique. This Liberty Street is very unique. Doug spoke of the demolition of the buildings when the street was widened. It has left a lot of buildings gone, and with triangular sites, it has set a new pattern on the south side of Liberty. And that pattern has been there for over 65 years. We feel strongly that the new building is more successful in terms of the architecture, that it is narrower along Walnut Street and fits in better with the historic character of all the buildings along Walnut Street, and that then we fill the whole site going in the east-west direction along Liberty. We feel like having some relief from the sidewalk is actually a good thing. I think for both pedestrians and the people living there. I don't think that the public has to be the ones who are occupying and enjoying the space outside of the building to make that. I don't think that discounts anything. I feel like having the space between the sidewalk and the building is extremely important. It creates a buffer. We are able to provide more trees, which are certainly needed along that very wide, busy street. And we feel like it's a better experience for residents and the pedestrians.
Did you guys at any time explore moving the street up the street?
Yeah, I can speak to the economic feasibility of it. So we did, as Danny said, we did meet with him multiple times and we did explore bringing it up to the lot line and hugging the corner. The total development costs in that concept increased by $4.38 million. On the operating side, it did add unit count to increase from 116 units to 128 units. So the added revenues were based on the comparable units in the building. Those resulted in monthly revenue amounts of $15,775 per month, or annually $189,300 annually. We have stabilized operating expenses of $4,500 annually, so our NOI change would be $144,000 annually, but with an added total development cost of $4.38 million. Total, that would bring our return down almost between 200 and 300 basis points, rendering the project economically unviable. As you guys are aware, we've been looking at this site for many, many years. We have tried several things. This is the project that we have found to be economically feasible, but only with the incentive package provided by the City of Cincinnati and DCED. So even this project as it stands had a substantial gap, and we received $2.9 million in TIF funding from the City of Cincinnati and a 15-year CRA abatement. If we were to shift and hug the corner, the project would no longer be feasible, because we would never be able to attract the debt and the equity necessary to bring it to life.
And you did not pursue historic tax credits?
Correct.
Were there any building code considerations that exacerbated that cost? Did you have to include an extra elevator or staircases or anything like that?
I'm gonna have to ask Will Yokel from our team to answer that question.
Well, damn it.
Could you repeat your question again?
Did you need to like add a staircase or elevator?
We didn't evaluate it enough to see if the travel distance it would be increased.
Okay.
Further.
Can you explain to me what the idea was about putting the residential patio along the street corner, as far as like, how does that activate? I pass a lot of residential patios walking on the street, and I feel kind of like it's a bit of a enclosed privatized space. And so I just kind of want to reconcile that a little bit.
So it's directly outside of an amenity space, a residential amenity space, so that you have that outside inside space. It's for us and our leasing team, we find we have 118 properties that we manage, and we feel confident that that would be an activated space by our residents just based off of the data that we have. The other thing is, I think that, from a leasing perspective, hugging that corner, and several of the folks that spoke and shared their testimony today alluded to some of the negative activity, crime, and just general issues that we deal with at that intersection. And we do see that as a barrier to absorption, to lease up, because that is, to live directly across from or catty corner from that Shell station, and have your front window facing that. We felt like with the barrier provided in the drawings and turning it into an amenity space, it would be more likely to be a viable use.
What about the rest of the space there, that green triangle? Is that just me landscaping? What's the intention there for that?
You say green or gray?
Green, next to the gray. To the right of it.
It is landscaping. There are also patios on the first floor.
There's no programmatic situation happening
There's no programmatic.
there? Fenced, or is that gonna be open space?
It's fenced.
It's fenced, and many of our tenants do have pets.
Okay. Fair. And so we'll move to parking. I noticed the ratio, and just, I guess, to ask staff, is this in an area where parking is not required? Is that correct? Correct. And how many parking spots are across the street at the Mercer lot, or the Kroger lot? Excuse me, the former Kroger lot.
Yeah, the back of
the former Kroger lot, that big block of parking.
Is it 82?
If he's referring to the 3 CDC lot, I don't know.
Not the 3 CDs, the one on Walnut.
Both of them, right?
You don't want to park there. He'll break your window out.
There's between 80 and 84 parking spots over there. I don't remember the exact amount. In the lot directly across from the transient lot, directly across from the development. In this rendering or in our plans, there's 71 spots. That's really a direct response to what we heard from the Over the Rhine Community Council as a top priority for them is that we have some parking on site.
Will the on-site parking also be utilized for the businesses on the first floor?
The businesses on the first floor will be utilizing the transient lot across the street.
And then I know it's not a 1-to-1 ratio, so the remaining units, are they just gonna have to find parking on their own or?
Well, I think historically what Urban Sites has found is about 33% of their residents don't have parking. I mean, don't have cars, so they won't need parking, but yes, they'll have to find, if they do need parking, they'll have to find another place to do it. You know, this parking thing is hard to, you heard some people say they don't want any parking. And then, you know, the community council said they don't do it if you don't have parking. And so trying to thread that needle has been, they say we don't want to compromise. I think we listen a lot to try to figure out where's that sweet
The
spot.
parking number is probably derived in like, what do you think investors will be able to kind of finance? Is that correct?
No, not nearly as much as it was on, you know, what we thought the building needed. And so if you do the math, we're roughly right at, you know, 70% of the residents having parking. And so with the other parking lot that also is owned by Urban Sites across the street, we thought it was enough, but I now don't know what the right number is, but we tried to strike that balance.
Are there any opportunities to, in the future, do development along Clay Street?
Yes, so we located, I have to look at Will when I answer design questions. This isn't my expertise, but the retention is located in the middle of the parking lot in a way that would facilitate future development along Clay Street, should we want to do that.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's all I've got.
That's good.
Any additional questions from the board? Okay, the applicant team has a chance for rebuttal. If you can keep it.
I'll keep it short. I think we've covered and thank you for asking questions. We've covered, I believe, the setback and our priority in terms of design and need from the owners. I can quickly talk about the demolition. Our team does not take OTR in all of the historic buildings and OTR lightly. The bulk of our work is in historic preservation. So we want to, with all due respect, we do feel strongly that this Grammars building can be, by way of that it is described in both the guidelines and the demolition case, be divided, being called out in two portions. The front portion, which we feel is the significant portion, and the rear portion, which is the non-significant portion. That language of portion is in both of those documents, and so we feel strongly that is something that is allowed to be discussed and to ask for the demolition of the rear of the building. The demolition does not impair the integrity of the front portion of the building in terms of both its physical structure, nor the historic significance of the front portion of the building. It was not historically visible from the primary streets. I know that we are well aware of the alley that Danny talked about that went behind the Grammars building. It does show up on the Sanborn maps, and it is not designated as with the word alley. It dead ends. It was not there to break up the mass of the buildings, as was suggested, but it instead was there to provide access to the rears of the buildings. And then lastly, this demolition will not affect the streetscape after this development is built. The other thing I would like to, I guess height, that's probably the last. Well, two things. One, real quick, is the height. These go hand in hand. The guidelines do say that the height of new construction should not vary more than 1 story from adjacent contributing buildings. It does not say from abutting buildings in the guidelines. Abutting is defined in the definitions. Adjacent is not. There are 4-story buildings in the primary face block along Walnut Street, which is where is our first look. And so we are 5 stories, there are 4 stories. So we are within that 1 story. We recognize that the Grammars building is a 3-story building, but we feel strongly that because of the pediment and the balustrade at the top of the building, it does create a larger mass and actually is up into the 4th story of our 5-story building. We feel strongly that it's not, that our building is not overwhelming Grammars and that it's compatible. And then I think lastly, I know that there was a discussion about the East Liberty Street elevation. And maybe it was in some written information that went to the city, but the length was important. That it is wider than it is tall, which is permitted on site elevations in the guidelines, and that's recognized. The 5-story height actually helps the vertical emphasis of the building, along with the balconies and the brick pilasters and the orientation and stacking of windows. And we feel that we have accomplished a vertical emphasis of the elevation along Liberty Street. I think that is it. Do you have anything else?
Unless there's other questions.
Any other questions?
You know, I'm urged to add that we had to find a way to put the project together that honored the historical preservation, that had that financial constraints that allowed it to go forward, both investors and debt. That's just a practical matter of it. And I don't know what all you have to consider, but that's a practical matter. But the third item is we had to build something where people wanted to live, where people wanted to make their home. And I think the design of it, layout, the amenities we've got in the building, the way we've approached the project, we balanced those three. And so the argument that we haven't been willing to compromise, I think trying to balance those three is a constant compromise. You heard it come out in the parking, you heard it come out in the layout of the setback. And so that's what we tried to do. And we hope that that is positioning this property for the next 100 years of use. And we thought it was a practical approach. So I just felt we need to close with that.
Each party will have up to 15 minutes for closing. The interested party will go first, and then the applicant will have the last word.
Thank you. Still nervous. Appreciate all of your attention, and I want to just respond and tap some loose ends. Starting with the parking. You heard that the parking is not a requirement. There's not a single space required by law or by zoning to provide that surface parking. It sounds like from the testimony of the applicant that the parking is in such a large amount of parking is being provided due to try to appease another stakeholder, but that's not, I think, what a majority of the community wants, and it's not required. I did want to mention, because Elm & Liberty was brought up, the parking ratio here, I think Mr. Gravely noted 70%. Approximately 70% of the units would have a parking space. At Elm & Liberty, it's 33%. So, it's double the parking that's being developed at the Elm & Liberty project. And I did want to mention how much community impact helped to shape and improve that Elm & Liberty project. Originally, it was only 100 units in a very large surface lot. And due to community pushback, the planning commission originally denied it. And they came back, it eventually now became a 300 unit project with the parking underground. And so it's a much better project now due to that compromise and them working through them having to follow the rules. Letters of support, just briefly, my colleague touched on the letters of support. I think all but 4 were submitted in this 2-week period for postponement. I just wanted to point that out. And a large majority are form letters that we're just asking people to sign at the bottom. We're aware that Cincinnati Preservation Association has written a letter of support. Just wanted to point out that there may be a conflict of interest there in the sense that, and he hasn't testified today, so he can't cross-examine, but I believe Will serves on the board. He's nodding of CPA. And CPA receives, I believe, significant funding from urban sites. So I think that it should not be overlooked, and it should be mentioned. Arguments about danger and crime are just like, we're really exaggerated. And I think those of you who have walked the neighborhood recently know that it just gets safer and safer and safer. And I certainly have no fear about walking across Liberty to wherever during the daytime. At night, there are a couple areas north of Liberty that I probably am going to be a little more careful about. But I just think that's really kind of was like Chicken Little argument. Sure, I hit those. Oh, Mr. Young, you mentioned the Rathskeller. I just wanted to clarify the Rathskeller, when you walk into Grammars, it's not in Grammars. The Rathskeller, you turn right and go into the adjacent historic building, the one next door. And that's where there was a basement that got also used and occupied. And that's still, the basement is still there and hopefully will still continue to be there. I've covered all of that. You know, I just really want to come back to what the zoning requires for this to be approved. And I know that I think it was either Deanna or Chantel said we have a right to apply for a variance. Yes, absolutely. The standard for the variance is that it has to be necessary and appropriate for historic conservation. And that's the key, that's the biggest key point that just does not get met here. And it doesn't speak to economic viability. It doesn't speak to any of these things. It just says that. So with respect to the setbacks, they would have to receive that variance. It has to be necessary and appropriate for historic conservation. Height, within 1 story of the adjacent contributing building. This isn't just a little 20-foot wide like infill building that's being built to 5 stories next to Grammars. It's 3 times as wide and about 10 times as long and massive as your average historic building. So it has such a differential impact on the surrounding fabric than just one 5-story building would have. So it's important to remember that's why I think the guideline is written that way, to be within 1 story of adjacent contributing buildings. I think the board has always interpreted adjacent to mean, what's the closest buildings or buildings. That's, I think, was the spirit of how the guideline was clearly written. I don't think it makes any sense for us to say adjacent means elsewhere. And if it does, guess what? There's a lot of 2-story buildings across the street. Maybe the development should be within 1 story of those buildings. So it can be played on both sides, that argument. And lastly, the demolition, I just really would strongly urge you, this notion of significant versus non-significant. It can't hold water. It can't hold water logically. It just can't. And if it does, then again, we're splitting these buildings into, ultimately the end result is we're splitting the buildings into the ornate front and all the sidewalls, all that beautiful brick just is non-significant. And that's the path we're headed toward. And then on economic hardship, I listed out the 3 reasons in the code that would qualify an applicant for economic hardship. If you were to tear down 2/3 of Grammars, and they have not met any of those, have not provided any testimony as to how any of those three things are met. No one's claimed to have that all economically viable use of the property would be deprived, or that they had an investment-backed expectation to be allowed to tear down this building. None of that has been claimed. And so again, the standard, the letter of the law simply is not being met here. And so put aside everything else, and we'd ask you to, you know, it's not easy, and it's, and being in your shoes, I'm sure is way different and hard than those of us on this side. And I know it takes courage to say no to a project that is investment, and to trust that something is ultimately going to end up at a better place that in the long view results in a better, more historically preserved Over the Rhine that continues to be a national emblem to people wanting to come and visit here and move here and live here. So thank you so much. Really appreciate you listening.
I'll be pretty quick. First, thank you to the board for hanging in there. And thanks to all the people who testified today, both pro and con. Words in the code and the guidelines themselves provide for and justify looking at parts of a building to determine its relative significance and non-significance. A first principle of legal code construction is to apply code definitions, but lacking those, you should look at the plain meanings of the words and the context in which they're used. And the guidelines give us this context. A part of a building is not significant under the guidelines if the other part of the building that's not being demolished is not historically or structurally impaired. And we've heard testimony on that from the architect and the applicant today. The integrity of the other part of the building is maintained. And we've also heard testimony, and it's not just the facade, it's 32 feet back. The historical Grammars bar room and the Rathskeller next door, those are all being preserved. And finally, the demolished part is not highly visible from the street now or after the project as it's proposed is completed. And again, we've heard testimony about that. It's not highly visible today, and it would be invisible once the project is completed. The board should therefore focus on these factors to determine that it's not significant, this portion that's being demolished. And it's really important for the board. The guidelines state that the board may properly consider whether the plans to build in place of the demolished part are consistent with the new construction and site improvement parts of the guidelines. I think it's beyond dispute that that's the case, that the proposal with the variances, and there are good reasons for those, is consistent on the whole with the new construction and site improvement parts of the guidelines. So based on the written materials, the staff report and the testimony, the board should address these questions, I think, and if it can answer yes to these 4 questions, then a C of A should be granted. Is the rear of 1442 Walnut not highly visible from surrounding streets now or as the plan is executed? The answer is yes. Does the demo of the rear part of 1442 Walnut not adversely affect the integrity of the remaining historic building? The answer is again yes. Does the demo of the rear 1442 Walnut enable compatible new construction? Yes, and we heard testimony that this project is probably not economically viable and will not go forward if they can't do that demolition of the insignificant portion. And finally, does the demo of the rear 1442 Walnut lead to better site improvements and less visible parking? The way the project has to be laid out to make it economically work, the answer is again yes. Therefore, the guidelines are satisfied by the applicant's plan that includes this demolition of this insignificant portion of 1442 Walnut. If the board finds in the alternative that it is significant, then despite the above, then you should respect the rigorous analysis performed by the applicant. That is in the record. It's Will Yokel's January 15, 2025 letter. And also Department of Economic Development's letter of January 29, 2025. And these prove convincingly that the project is infeasible and not economically prudent to undertake if the demolition portion is not approved. Economic hardship therefore justifies the demo without which the project is not likely to be undertaken. The opponent focuses on the all economic use test, but I think that is properly applied to a single building. And again, the guidelines themselves say when there is new construction involved, the board can look beyond just that fact. So in this case, it's actually in the interest of historic conservation to approve the partial demolition and to grant the requested variances. We heard a lot of testimony after the break about why the applicant chose not to build to the corner. Those are design choices and livability choices. A lot of prudence should be and latitude should be given to urban sites. They have tons of experience developing and managing property over the Rhine, and they know what they're talking about. The project with these variances preserves existing contributing buildings along Walnut, vastly improves street integrity on Walnut with 2 infills, adds a street presence to the south side of Liberty, follows existing Liberty South building and Sanborn historical patterns, brings residential density back to this part of OTR as an urban mixed-use neighborhood. And a lot of the testimony from the public was exactly on this point. There have to be human beings back in this part of OTR. Feeds new small business growth. There are retail sites that are going to be activated by this project. And finally, removes the blight influences of vacant buildings and lots. We all agree that that's what needs to happen. And this project will do all of those things. Thank you for your consideration to grant the requested variances in the C of A for this worthy project.
Questions or comments from the board? If there are none, I would entertain a motion.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we go into executive session.
Is there a second?
Second.
Call the roll. Mr. Zalesko?
Aye.
Mr. Robbins?
Aye.
Mr. Sunderman?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
The chair votes aye. We will be back.